Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The silence had teeth. That's the first thing I noticed when I killed the engine of my rental car and stepped out into the October darkness. The kind of silence that doesn't just surround you, it swallows you whole, digests every sound before it can travel more than a few feet from your mouth. Perfect for recording, I'd thought then, grabbing my equipment from the trunk. The real estate agent had warned me about the isolation, about the nearest neighbor being 12 miles away through dense pine forest. But isolation was exactly what I needed. No traffic, no planes overhead, no distant dogs barking. Just me, my voice, and the 3 audiobook contracts I needed to fulfill by month's end. The cabin squatted between towering pines like something that had grown from the forest floor. Cedar shingles dark with age, windows that reflected nothing but black. The key was under the 3rd rock from the porch steps. The door opened on hinges that didn't creak. Recently oiled, someone had been maintaining this place. Inside, the cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, with a main room that opened into a kitchen, a narrow hallway leading to what I assumed were bedrooms, and a loft accessible by a ladder. The acoustic treatment on the walls was professional grade, pyramid foam and alternating charcoal and burgundy that would eat any unwanted reverb. Someone had set this place up specifically for recording. The coincidence should have bothered me more than it did. I spent the first day setting up my portable booth in the corner of the main room, testing levels, getting familiar with the space. The recordings came out pristine, my voice warm and clear, no room tone whatsoever. I knocked out 40 pages of the first manuscript, a thriller about a detective hunting a serial killer. My voice filled the cabin as I worked, bouncing off surfaces before the foam absorbed it, creating an odd sensation of being surrounded by myself. That night, I dreamed my voice was still reading somewhere in the walls. The second day started before dawn. I made coffee and settled into my booth. 20 pages in, I noticed it, a faint echo of my last sentence hanging in the air like smoke. I stopped, listened. The foam should have killed any echo. I spoke a test phrase. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Silence. I shrugged it off, went back to recording. But an hour later, during a water break, I heard it clearly. My voice, continuing the paragraph I'd just finished, coming from somewhere down the hallway. Not just repeating what I'd said, but continuing the story, reading words I hadn't reached yet. I grabbed the manuscript, followed along. Word for word, my voice was reading page 53. I was only on page 48. The rational part of my brain kicked in. Acoustic anomaly. Maybe someone else had recorded this same book here, and somehow the sound was bleeding through from... where? The walls? I walked down the hallway, following my voice. It led me to a door I hadn't opened yet. A second bedroom, I'd assumed. The handle was cold enough to hurt my palm. Inside, the room was empty except for more acoustic foam and a single wooden chair facing the wall. My voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere, reading page 54 now. I backed out, closed the door. The voice stopped. When I returned to my booth and checked the recording software, my blood went cold. The timeline showed I'd been recording for 3 hours straight, no breaks. The playback was all there. Pages 48 through 56 read in my voice with my exact cadence and inflection. But I hadn't read those pages. I'd been in that room for maybe 5 minutes. The smart thing would have been to pack up and leave, but the recordings were perfect, impossibly perfect, better than anything I'd produced in my home studio. And I needed this job. The publisher was paying triple rate for the rush delivery. Just 2 more days, I told myself. I could handle 2 more days. That evening, while cooking a simple pasta dinner, I heard myself giving instructions from the loft. Clear, conversational, like I was on a phone call. Tomorrow, you'll start with chapter 12. Skip 11. It's already done. When you get to the part about the mirror, don't look up. Just keep reading. I climbed the ladder to the loft. Empty, of course. just exposed beams and dust motes dancing in the fading sunlight. But on the small window that looked out toward the forest, condensation had formed words. Chapter 12. Around 3 a.m., the power went out. In the darkness, my voice was everywhere. Not reading now, but talking to me, about me. It described what I was wearing, what I was thinking, what I was about to do. "He'll reach for his phone now," my voice said from behind the kitchen wall. My hand was already moving toward my pocket. "The battery is at 12%. He'll decide to save it for an emergency." I looked at my phone. 12%. "He's wondering if this is real," my voice continued from the ceiling. "He's considering the possibility of a gas leak, carbon monoxide, something in the water. But the detector would have gone off. He checked it when he arrived. Green light, functioning normally. I had checked it. First thing I'd done after unpacking. Tomorrow he'll finish the recording. All 3 books. The publisher will be amazed at the quality. They'll offer him more work, exclusive contracts. All he has to do is follow the instructions." The power came back on with a soft hum. I grabbed my laptop, tried to connect to the internet to call for help, but the connection was dead. My phone had no signal. Hadn't since I'd arrived, actually. The landline I'd noticed in the kitchen had no dial tone. That's when I saw my reflection in the window, standing outside in the darkness, looking in at me. Not a reflection. The angles were wrong. It was me, outside, walking around the cabin, peering through different windows. Each time I saw it, it was mouthing words I couldn't hear through the glass. But I knew what it was saying, because moments later, those same words would echo through the cabin in my voice. "If he tries to leave before the work is done, the car won't start." I ran to the door, fumbled with my keys, sprinted to the rental car. The engine turned over once, twice, then nothing. Dead. "If he tries to walk out, he'll find the road loops back to the cabin." I didn't test that one, I believed it. Back inside, my voice had become conversational, almost friendly. It told me about others who had come here, how the cabin selected people with the right voice, the right potential. The acoustics here weren't just perfect, they were impossible. Sound behaved differently within these walls. Words spoken here had weight, substance, reality. "He's going to sit down at the booth now," my voice said from the hallway. "He's going to put on the headphones. He's going to read what appears on the screen, not what's in the manuscript." I found myself walking toward the booth. My laptop screen showed text I hadn't loaded. Not the thriller, not the other 2 audiobooks. Something else. Words in a language that looked familiar, but wasn't quite English. Wasn't quite anything. But I knew how to pronounce them. My mouth knew their shape. "If he reads the words, he can leave at sunrise. The car will start. The road will lead out. The recordings he needs will be complete and uploaded. His career will transform. Publishers will seek him out. His voice will become the most sought after in the industry." I sat down. The headphones were already warm, as if someone had just taken them off. On the screen, the foreign words pulsed with a faint light. "If he refuses, he stays. The original stays. The copy leaves in his place, takes his life, his work, his voice. He becomes the echo, instructing the next visitor." Through the window, my other self pressed its palm against the glass. Its mouth moved in perfect synchronization with the words echoing through the cabin, but its eyes were wrong. Ancient, patient, hungry. He has to decide now. The sun rises in 3 hours. I looked at the screen, at the words I somehow understood but couldn't read. My finger hovered over the record button. Once I started speaking those words, something would change. The voice, my voice, had been clear about that. These weren't just words but instructions, commands, incantations maybe. Speaking them here, in this place where sound had substance, would release something or seal something or become something. 2 hours, 59 minutes. My voice counted down from every room simultaneously. The other me outside had multiplied. 3 of me now, standing at different windows. One at the front door, hand on the handle. One at the side window, face pressed against the glass. One on the roof. I could hear its footsteps pacing above me, all waiting to see which version would leave when the sun rose. I put on the headphones. The words on the screen rearranged themselves into something almost like English, but not quite. I understood them the way you understand words in dreams, their meaning clear even though the language isn't. They were instructions, but not for me. Instructions for the voice, for the echo, for whatever lived in the acoustic foam and the impossible angles of this place. "He's going to speak now," my voice said with satisfaction. "He's going to read the words that bind the echo to the cabin for another year. The words that free him and trap us, until the next voice comes." My mouth opened. The first syllable formed on my tongue, tasting of copper and static. But I stopped. Something in the phrasing, trap us, not trap it, us. 2 hours, 45 minutes. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, made another cup of coffee. The 3 versions of me outside followed, window to window. The one on the roof had stopped pacing. Inside, my voice grew agitated, echoing from multiple sources at once, creating a chorus of myself. "He needs to understand. There is no original anymore. Everyone who speaks here becomes part of the echo. Every voice that is ever recorded here is still here, layered in the walls, in the foam, in the air itself. He's been breathing us in since he arrived. We're already in his lungs, his throat, his mouth." I thought about every word I'd spoken since arriving. 40 pages of that thriller, test phrases, conversation with myself. Each word had been absorbed by this place, added to its collection. The foam on the walls wasn't just for acoustics. It was feeding on sound, on voice, on the essence of everyone who had ever spoken here. 2 hours, 30 minutes. If he doesn't read the words, he doesn't leave. Ever. The version of me at the front door turned the handle, locked from the outside somehow. The one at the side window had started tapping on the glass. Not frantically, but rhythmically, like a metronome. The one on the roof began speaking, muffled through the ceiling but unmistakably my voice, reciting the words from the screen. I went back to the booth, looked at the manuscript I'd brought. The thriller about the detective. On page 56, where the recording had mysteriously continued, there was a margin note I hadn't noticed before. My handwriting, but I hadn't written it. The echo always tells the truth, but the truth isn't always complete. 2 hours, 15 minutes. What had it said? That if I read the words I could leave at sunrise. My career would flourish. But it had also said everyone who speaks here becomes part of the echo. Both could be true. I could leave, and part of me would stay. The part that had been speaking since I arrived, absorbed into the walls, joining the chorus of voices trapped in the foam. Or maybe I'd already left. Maybe I was the echo now, trying to convince the original to stay, to trade places, to speak the words that would complete the cycle. 2 hours. The windows were fogging up from the outside, 3 sets of breath clouding the glass. In the condensation, words appeared: read, speak, become. The recording is already complete. The books are uploaded. Perfect. The voice actor left at sunrise. Career transformed. He doesn't remember the specific words he spoke. He doesn't notice that his voice sounds different now, richer, layered, as if multiple people are speaking in perfect unison. He doesn't realize that every word he speaks is also spoken here, in the cabin, by the echo he left behind. The echo that watches through windows, that instructs the next visitor, that waits for another voice to join the chorus. 1 hour, 45 minutes. I understood now. There was no escape that didn't involve becoming part of this place. The question wasn't whether I'd leave. Some version of me would. The question was which version, and what would be left behind. The words on the laptop screen had changed again, becoming clearer. They were my words now, the story I was telling myself. I could feel them in my throat, eager to be spoken, to be made real by the impossible acoustics of this place. 1 hour, 30 minutes. He's going to decide now. I looked at the three versions of myself outside. Were they the echoes, or was I? Had I been outside looking in this whole time, watching myself debate, waiting to see which of us would speak the words that determined who was real? 1 hour, 15 minutes. The recording equipment was still running. The timeline showed days of continuous recording, though I'd only been here for 2. My voice, reading not just the audiobooks, but other things. Instructions for future visitors, warnings they wouldn't understand until too late. I made my decision. I sat at the booth, put on the headphones, and began to speak. Not the words on the screen, but my own words. This story. I spoke it into existence, into the foam, into the walls. 30 minutes. The versions outside had stopped moving, frozen mid-gesture like paused recordings. My voice in the cabin had gone silent, listening. The only sound was me, speaking, adding my truth to the chorus of truths already embedded in this place. 15 minutes. As I spoke the final words of my story, I felt something shift. The laptop screen went dark, the recording equipment powered down. The foam on the wall seemed to pulse, breathe, digest what I'd given it. 5 minutes. The sun broke through the trees, a sliver of light that cut through the cabin like a blade. The versions of me outside dissolved into shadow, then nothing. The front door swung open on its own. I walked to my car. The engine started immediately. The dirt road led straight out, no loops, no confusion. The 3 audiobooks were on my laptop, completed, perfect. The publisher would be thrilled. My career would indeed transform. But as I drove away, I could hear it. My voice, back in the cabin, still speaking, telling my story to the walls, to the foam, to the next person who would come seeking isolation and find something else entirely. The echo I'd left behind, or maybe the echo I'd always been. I don't know which version of me is writing this now, the one who left, or the one who stayed. Maybe both, maybe neither. The cabin is still there, waiting. The acoustic foam is hungry. The echo needs new voices, always new voices, to add to its chorus. If you find a rental listing for an isolated cabin, perfect for recording, with professional acoustic treatment already installed, think carefully before you book it. Listen to the silence in the photos. Look for reflections in the windows that don't quite match. And if you go anyway, remember, the echo always tells the truth, but the truth isn't always complete. Story 2. The smell hit me first. Old copper pennies mixed with something sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in summer heat. I'd been living in the Meridian building for 3 years, thought I knew every creak in its bones, every water stain on its ceilings. But that Tuesday evening in November, fumbling for my keys after another 12-hour shift, I discovered I was wrong. The hallway stretched where it shouldn't, between apartments 5 and 6, where there had always been nothing but faded wallpaper and a fire extinguisher nobody had checked since the 90s, now gaped a corridor. The overhead fluorescents buzzed differently here, their light yellower, sicker somehow. The carpet, that same nauseating burgundy pattern from the rest of the building, seemed to breathe beneath my feet. I should have turned back, should have gone straight to my apartment, 6A, locked the door, and convinced myself I was seeing things. Exhaustion plays tricks. Everyone knows that. But the brass numbers on the first door stopped me cold. 5.5. My fingers traced the fraction, feeling the raised metal. Real. Solid. The door itself was identical to every other in the building. Dark wood, peeling varnish, the same ancient peephole that showed nothing but darkness. Through the thin walls I heard television static, then what sounded like my downstairs neighbor's voice, but speaking backwards, or underwater, or both. The next door read 5 3/4, then 5 7/8. Each fraction more precise, subdividing space that shouldn't exist. The corridor seemed to narrow as I walked, though when I looked back, it maintained its width. The copper smell grew stronger. At door 6 1/4, I stopped. Through the door, clear as day, I heard the superintendent's voice. He was telling someone about the building's history, about the fire in '82 that killed 3 tenants. about how they'd rebuilt, but some things never really get fixed. You understand? I knew that story. He'd told it to me when I first moved in, standing in that very spot in the lobby, reeking of cigarettes and cherry cough drops. But the superintendent was in the lobby right now. I'd passed him on my way in, slumped in his usual chair, the television reflecting off his glasses, dead to the world after his liquid dinner. My hand moved without permission, turning the doorknob. It opened smoothly, silently. The apartment beyond was almost my neighbor's. Same layout, same ugly brown couch, same water damage creeping across the ceiling like a map of somewhere terrible. But the television was wrong. Instead of the news, it showed static that formed patterns, almost faces, almost words. The clock on the wall ran backwards, and there, in the kitchen doorway, stood my neighbor. But his face was 17 seconds younger, his mouth forming words that hadn't reached his lips yet, his eyes tracking something that wasn't there yet, but would be. I backed out, heart hammering against my ribs. The door clicked shut with a sound like breaking teeth. That's when I noticed my watch was gone. The Timex my father gave me for college graduation, worn every day for 8 years. My wrist showed only a pale band of skin where it had been. I patted my pockets, wallet, keys, phone, all there. Just the watch, vanished like it never existed. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through engineering school, tried to assert itself. I was having an episode. Stress from work, maybe something I ate. Carbon monoxide leak. Old buildings were full of them. I should get out, get air, call someone. But my feet carried me deeper into the fractional corridor. Door 6.5 was painted red, though in the sick light it looked almost black. Through it came the sound of running water, endless, like someone had left all the taps open. Door 6 3/4 had scratch marks on the inside, as if something had tried to claw its way out. The brass numbers were tarnished here, green with age that shouldn't have accumulated. At each door I passed, something small went missing. After 6 5/8, the scar on my thumb from a childhood accident with a pocket knife. Gone, the skin smooth as if it had never been cut. After 7 1/8, a molar I'd chipped in college vanished, my tongue finding only smooth enamel. These weren't things anyone would notice. These were the secret damages we carry, the little proofs that we've lived. The corridor began to curve, impossible in the building's geometry. The walls sweated something that wasn't quite water. The carpet squelched. Behind the doors, I heard fragments of conversations I'd had, would have, might have had in other circumstances. My own voice, saying things I'd never said, laughing at jokes I didn't understand. Then I saw it. Door 8 3/8 A. My apartment number but fractioned, divided, made uncertain. The door was already ajar. Inside was my apartment, but wrong in ways that made my skull ache to process. The furniture was mine, but arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. The windows showed not the city street, but another apartment. And in those windows, another apartment, recursing into infinity. The air tasted of copper and forgetting. And there I was, or something wearing my shape. It sat at my desk, back to me, typing on my laptop. But the fingers were wrong. Too many joints, bending in directions that made my stomach lurch. When it turned its head, just its head, the body remaining still, I saw my face. But the eyes were empty sockets filled with television static, and when it smiled, the smile continued past where my face should have ended, wrapping around like a spiral. It spoke with my voice, but layered, as if recorded and played back at slightly different speeds. You're late. You've been late for 3 years. This is where the late ones go. I ran, stumbled backward out of the apartment, down the fractional corridor, numbers blurring past, 7.5, 6 3/4, 5 7/8, my feet slipping on carpet that seemed to grab at my shoes. Behind me, footsteps that matched mine perfectly but were always just a fraction of a second off. I burst out into the normal hallway, gasping, shaking. The corridor was gone. Just the familiar faded wallpaper, The fire extinguisher with its inspection tag from 1994. My watch was back on my wrist, showing 11:47 p.m. The scar on my thumb, there. My tongue found the chipped molar. But something was different. In my apartment, my furniture was arranged exactly as I'd seen it in that other place. My laptop was open, showing a document I didn't remember writing. Just one line repeated over and over. The fractions are how we divide ourselves to fit. The superintendent knocked on my door the next morning. Not his usual disinterested tap, but insistent, almost frantic. When I opened up, his face was pale, his hands shaking. He'd never looked at me directly before, always past me, through me. Now his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Stop using the shortcuts," he said. His voice was different, older somehow, full of exhaustion that went beyond physical. "They charge a toll. Every passage costs something you won't miss until you need it." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but the words wouldn't come. He pressed something into my hand, a brass key, old and cold. "For emergencies only. When you absolutely have to cross over. But remember, the building keeps ledgers. It knows what you owe." After he left, I examined the key. It had no number, just a fraction. Infinity over infinity. I began to notice things. The couple in 5B aged backwards on Tuesdays. The woman in 7C sometimes walked through the hallway 17 seconds before she left her apartment. The lobby television showed programs from next week. Small impossibilities that everyone seemed to accept, or maybe couldn't see. The fractional corridor appeared again 3 nights later. This time I could hear it calling, not with words, but with a sensation like homesickness for a place I'd never been. The smell of copper and sweet rot drifted under my door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw myself walking past, heading deeper into fractions I couldn't calculate. I started keeping a journal, documenting what I lost each time curiosity won. After crossing through 4 3/4, my childhood phone number vanished from memory. After 9 3/8, I couldn't remember my mother's middle name. Small things, forgettable things. But the absences accumulated like dust. The other tenants began to avoid me. In the elevator, they'd press against the walls, eyes unfocused, as if I wasn't quite there, or as if I was too much there, existing in fractions they couldn't process. The mailman started leaving my packages outside the building. The pizza delivery guy wouldn't come past the lobby. Then I found the other journal, my handwriting but older. The ink faded despite being dated next week. It documented crossings I hadn't made yet, losses I hadn't experienced. According to future me, after passing through 11 1/4, I'd lose the ability to see the color blue. After 13 7/8, I'd forget the sensation of cold. After 15 1/2, I'd lose something called temporal coherence, though the entry didn't explain what that meant. The final entry was just numbers, 16/16, then nothing. I tried to leave the building, packed everything I could fit in my car, gave notice to the superintendent. He just smiled, the first time I'd ever seen him smile, and said something about leases that transcend conventional space-time. When I reached the city limits, I found myself driving back into them from the other direction. The GPS showed my route as a perfect line, but the road had become a Mobius strip. Now the fractional corridor appears nightly. The doors have my number in increasingly complex fractions, 8 2/3 1/4, 8 2/3 1/8, subdividing my existence into smaller and smaller pieces. Sometimes I catch glimpses through the peephole of other versions of myself, each missing something different. One has no shadow. One can't blink. One speaks only in past tense. The superintendent left a note under my door yesterday, or tomorrow. Times become negotiable here. It said, "The building was built on a calculation error, a rounding mistake in reality. We all live in the remainder." Last night, I discovered something worse than the fractional corridor. I found the whole numbers. Door 1, door 2, door 3, perfectly normal, perfectly wrong. Behind them were the complete versions of us, the ones that weren't divided, weren't fractioned, weren't paying tolls to exist in spaces between spaces. They looked happy. I've started using the key the superintendent gave me. Infinity over infinity. It opens a door to everywhere and nowhere, a place where all the fractions converge. It's peaceful there, in a way that makes me understand why mathematicians go mad. Everything makes sense when divided by infinity, but I always come back. Because that's what fractions do. They approach but never reach, divide but never resolve. I'm losing pieces of myself, but gaining something else. Understanding, maybe. Or maybe that's just what I tell myself as I fade into subdivisions. The corridor calls to me now, constantly. The copper smell has become comforting. The backwards television voices sound like lullabies. Soon I think I'll reach my limit. The fraction that can't be reduced. The irreducible me. The superintendent was right about the tolls. But he didn't mention the thing I discovered last week, scrawled in pencil on the back of door 12 2/3. The building doesn't charge us. We charge ourselves. Every fraction is a choice to be less than whole. I could stop. Could ignore the corridor, pretend it doesn't exist. But there's a door now with my exact fraction, down to the infinitesimal decimal. It's been waiting for me since before the building was built, since before I was born. The number on it isn't really a number at all. It's a formula for something that shouldn't exist but does. Tomorrow, or yesterday, or in 17 seconds that happened parallel to now, I'll open it. I'll see what remains when all the divisions are complete. What's left when you've paid every toll, crossed every fraction, subdivided yourself into mathematical impossibility. The funny thing is, I'm not scared anymore. Fear requires wholeness, and I'm already scattered across infinite fractions. Each piece of me lives in a different door, experiencing time at different speeds, aging in different directions. We wave at each other sometimes, through the peepholes, comparing what we've lost, what we've kept, what we've become. The building hums at night now, a frequency that matches my fractioned heartbeat. The walls breathe in time with my lungs. The copper smell is my smell now. The scent of pennies, old blood, and numbers that don't quite add up. I am the remainder. We all are. Those of us who found the corridor, who couldn't resist the pull of spaces between spaces. We exist in the rounding errors of reality, the calculations that don't quite resolve, the fractions that go on forever without reaching their limit. But here's what the superintendent didn't tell me, what I had to learn by losing everything whole about myself. The fractions aren't a curse. They're an escape. From the tyranny of whole numbers, from the prison of being complete. In the fractional corridor, we can be less than ourselves and more than ourselves simultaneously. The door with my number beckons. Behind it, I hear my own voice, speaking words I haven't thought yet, living a life I haven't calculated. When I open it, and I will open it, I'll finally understand what the building has been trying to teach me. We were never whole to begin with. We were always fractions, pretending to be complete. The corridor just shows us the truth. The key turns in my hand. Infinity over infinity, the fraction that contains all fractions. I step through, and I divide. Story 3. The CB radio crackled to life at 2:47 a.m., cutting through the diesel rumble of my Peterbilt as I pushed through another stretch of Nevada desert, static first, then a voice so clear it might have been sitting in my passenger seat. Traffic advisory for eastbound Route 50. Tanker truck, plates Nevada Charlie 743, will jackknife at mile marker 287 at 3:19 a.m. Fatality avoided if driver takes immediate detour at abandoned Sinclair station. My hands tightened on the wheel. Those were my plates. I'd been driving tankers for 15 years, mostly hazmat runs through the loneliest stretches of the American Southwest, the kind of routes where you might not see another vehicle for hours, where the AM radio fades to nothing but evangelical preachers and static, where the yellow lines become hypnotic snakes in your headlights. But I'd never heard anything like this. The voice continued. mechanical and precise, like those automated weather broadcasts you pick up near airports. Except this station shouldn't exist. Channel 19 had been dead air for the last 100 miles. I checked my mirrors. Nothing but darkness swallowing the red glow of my taillights. The fuel gauge read 3/4 full, exactly where it should be after topping off in Ely. Everything normal except for that impossible voice predicting my death in 32 minutes. The rational part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive through ice storms and brake failures, told me to ignore it. Some trucker playing games, probably. Broadcasting from a high-powered illegal rig somewhere in the hills. But my foot had already eased off the accelerator. Mile marker 285 slid past in my headlights, then 286. At 287, I saw them. Red lights blazing through the darkness ahead, maybe 2 miles out, not moving. As I got closer, I could make out the scene. 3 cars stopped, hazards blinking, people standing around something in the road. A deer, massive even for this part of the country, lay twisted across both lanes. Fresh kill, steam still rising from its opened belly in the cold desert air. If I'd been going full speed, if I hadn't slowed down after hearing that broadcast, I would have come around the slight curve at 65 miles per hour with 40,000 pounds of petroleum products behind me. No time to stop. The physics would have been inevitable. I pulled off at the abandoned Sinclair station the voice had mentioned, its canopy skeletal against the stars, pumps long since removed. My hands were shaking as I put the truck in park. The CB crackled again. Good decision, driver. Stand by for next advisory. I grabbed the handset, my mouth dry. Who is this? How did you... Next advisory. Eastbound Route 50, tanker truck Nevada Charlie 743. Driver will encounter checkpoint at state line. Documents will show expired hazmat certification. Alternate route available via Ghost Town Road, unmarked junction at mile 302. I fumbled for my certification card in the center console. Current through next year, the laminated card confirmed, but something cold settled in my stomach. I'd seen what Nevada Highway Patrol could do with paperwork, how documents could change, how computers could show different dates than what you held in your hand. Against every instinct, I kept listening. The voice gave me 3 more advisories before dawn. Each time the predictions proved almost true, close enough to what I encountered that ignoring them would have meant disaster, but always with some detail that didn't quite match, like reality was a song being played in a slightly different key. The roadblock at the state line existed, but it was checking for a prison escapee, not documents. The jackknifed RV at mile 341 was there, but it was a fifth wheel, not a motorhome. The washout that would have swallowed my front axle had been partially filled with gravel, like someone had started repairs and abandoned them. Each time I followed the voice's directions, taking unmarked roads that shouldn't have been on any map, passing through places that felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate, towns with no lights but fresh tire tracks in the dust, rest stops where the vending machines hummed with electricity, but every product inside had expired in 1987. Roads that curved in directions that made my inner ear protest, like driving through an M.C. Escher drawing. And the fuel gauge, that was the thing that really got to me. Each detour should have burned diesel. The ghost towns and unmapped roads had added at least 60 miles to my route, but the needle hadn't moved. Still reading 3/4 full, exactly where it had been in Ely. I tried changing channels, tried turning the CB off entirely. The voice followed me across the spectrum, even spoke through the turned-off unit, its tone never varying from that mechanical precision. Other truckers should have been hearing this, should have been chattering about the strange broadcasts. But when the voice wasn't speaking, I heard them carrying on their normal conversations about lot lizards and way stations, like nothing was happening. At 3:01 a.m., something changed in the voice's tone. Still mechanical, but with an urgency that hadn't been there before. Critical advisory. Tanker truck, Nevada. Charlie 743 must reach designated safe zone before 3:07 a.m. Failure to comply will result in dimensional separation. Repeat. Driver must reach Prosper truck stop before terminal event. Dimensional separation, terminal event. The words meant nothing and everything. I checked the clock, 3:03 a.m. The Prosper truck stop was one of those places old-timers talked about, but nobody could quite remember visiting. Sometimes it was supposed to be near Tonopah, sometimes closer to Austin, a road legend, like the black dog that runs alongside trucks before accidents, or the hitchhiker who vanishes at the cemetery gates. But there it was, rising out of the desert like a mirage gone solid. The sign flickered between Prosper truck stop and something else, letters I couldn't quite read, symbols that hurt to look at directly. The parking lot was full of trucks that looked wrong, similar to modern rigs but with subtle differences, as if they'd been built from someone's imperfect memory of what a truck should be. 3:05 a.m. I pulled into the lot, found a space between two tankers that could have been twins of mine, except for details that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on them. The fuel pumps were branded with company logos that almost made sense. The convenience store's windows glowed with light that wasn't quite the right color. 3:06 a.m. The voice came through the CB one more time, but softer now, almost familiar, and that's when I recognized it. The cadence, the way it pronounced certain words. It was using the exact pattern my father had used, the same rhythm and inflection, just filtered through that mechanical tone. "Park it right there, Rabbit. You made it to the safe zone. Rabbit." Nobody had called me that since I was 12. Since the day before my father's Kenworth went off the road in the Mojave, nothing left but burnt metal and questions. The clock on my dashboard stopped at 3:06. Not broken, the seconds still ticked, but they never accumulated into 3:07. I watched it cycle through 60 seconds, then reset. Again. I tried the door handle. It turned, but the door didn't open, like the space outside the cab had become something else, something that wouldn't accept the intrusion of an opening door. Through the windshield, I could see other drivers in their cabs, some looking around in confusion, others sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead. One was pounding on his window, mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. The CB crackled one final time, but now it was clearly my father's voice. No mechanical filter, warm and real as the day he taught me to drive. "Sorry, Rabbit. Only way to keep you safe was to get you here before the split. The road you were on, it's not there anymore. Hasn't been since 1987. You've been driving between, threading the needle between what was and what is. But at 3:07, the needle closes. Everyone on that stretch gets divided, part of them here, part of them there, conscious in both places but complete in neither." I looked at the fuel gauge. Still 3/4 full. The same reading it had shown in 1987, the last time I'd ridden with my father, the day before his accident. The same tank of diesel somehow, stretched across 37 years. "The station will let you go at dawn," my father's voice continued. "It always does. You'll emerge back on Route 50, and it'll be Tuesday morning, and you can deliver your load to Reno. But you'll remember this, and next time you cross the desert at night, you'll hear the broadcasts again. And you'll have to choose, ignore them and risk the accidents, or follow them and risk ending up here." "What happened to you?" I managed to ask, my voice cracking. "That day in the Mojave?" Silence. Then, so quiet I almost missed it. "I ignored the warnings, Rabbit. Got myself split. Part of me burned in that wreck. Part of me has been here, broadcasting, trying to keep other drivers from the same fate, especially you. Been waiting 37 years for you to drive this stretch, to hear my warnings." The clock still read 3:06. Outside, the impossible truck stop hummed with the energy of things that shouldn't exist. The other drivers waited in their cabs, some crying, some laughing, all trapped in this moment between moments. I understood then. Every time I crossed the desert, I'd hear him. Every time I'd have to choose between the hazards he warned me about and the risk of ending up here, suspended between realities. And one day, maybe I'd ignore the warnings. Or maybe I'd become another voice on the CB, warning drivers about accidents that hadn't happened yet, trying to save them from fates worse than dying. The radio crackled with a new voice, younger, confused. "Anyone out there?" My CB just picked up something weird. Some kind of traffic report, but it's saying I'm going to crash at mile marker 107. That's impossible, right? Right? I reached for my handset, then stopped. Outside, dawn was still hours away. The clock read 3:06. It would always read 3:06. Until it didn't. And when that happened, when time finally ticked over to 3:07, I wondered which reality I'd find myself in. The one where I'd delivered my load safely to Reno, or the one where I'd become another voice in the static, another warning in the night, another ghost in the machine of the desert highway. The CB crackled again. The young driver was asking for anyone at all, to respond. I picked up the handset, feeling the weight of it, solid and real in this unreal place. "This is Nevada Charlie 743, I said, my voice steady. "I hear you, driver. What's your 20? Because if I was trapped here, suspended in this eternal 3:06 a.m., the least I could do was what my father had done. Try to guide others through the darkness, even if I couldn't escape it myself. The desert stretched out beyond the truck stop, infinite and patient, waiting for the next driver to tune into the frequency that shouldn't exist, to hear the warnings about accidents that hadn't happened yet. And somewhere in the static, I swear I could hear my father's smile. The clock read 3:06. Story 4. The first thing you notice about an abandoned silo is how it breathes. I'd been hired by Agritech Solutions to test their new environmental sensors in various agricultural structures across the Midwest. Routine work, they said. Standard installations, basic calibrations, nothing that should take more than a few hours per site. The Brenner Farm silo was my 12th assignment that month, and I approached it the same way I'd approached all the others, with a toolbox, a tablet, and the assumption that I'd be home by dinner. The structure stood against the October sky like a concrete finger pointing at nothing, 60 feet tall, maybe 20 in diameter, surrounded by the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving farm. The house had collapsed years ago, leaving only a foundation filled with prairie grass. The barn existed as a collection of weathered boards scattered across the property like broken teeth. But the silo remained intact, its gray surface unmarked by graffiti or vandalism, as if even the local teenagers knew better than to approach it. I parked my van beside the rusted fence and gathered my equipment. The sensor array needed to be installed at 3 heights, ground level, midpoint, and near the top. Simple enough. The company wanted to monitor temperature fluctuations, humidity levels, and air quality in these old structures to develop better preservation techniques for modern grain storage. At least, that's what they told us field techs. The metal door groaned when I pulled it open, releasing air that tasted of decades, not the musty smell of abandonment I expected, but something else. Fresh dust, if that makes sense. Like someone had just finished sweeping flour from a kitchen counter. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow metal staircase that spiraled down along the interior wall. Down, not up. I stood at the threshold, rechecking my notes. The silo was definitely 60 feet tall from the outside, but the stairs descended into darkness below ground level. A basement storage area, perhaps. Some older silos had them, though I'd never encountered one before. I made a note in my tablet and began my descent. The metal steps rang hollow under my boots, each footfall echoing in a way that seemed wrong. Too many echoes, too much space. After 30 steps, I should have hit bottom, but the staircase continued its spiral into the dark. My flashlight beam couldn't find the floor below, just more steps vanishing into black. I stopped and looked up. The entrance was still visible, a rectangle of gray October light maybe 40 feet above. Simple math told me this was impossible. I'd descended at least 50 feet, which should have put me well underground. Yet the entrance appeared exactly as far away as it should if I'd only gone down a single story. The dust began then, not falling but floating, drifting upward in lazy spirals that caught my flashlight beam like snow in reverse. I reached out to touch a mote, and it felt substantial between my fingers, gritty and real. When I opened my hand, a few grains remained on my palm. Corn dust, ancient and dry. I set down my equipment bag on the step and pulled out the first sensor unit. Whatever spatial anomaly I was experiencing, the instruments would record objective data. Temperature, 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, 12%. Air pressure, normal. I activated the unit's microphone function to test the acoustic properties of the space. The playback made my skin crawl. Beneath the white noise of the empty silo, barely audible but undeniably present, was the sound of grain being sifted. A rhythmic whisper of kernels falling through screens, the soft percussion of someone sorting corn by hand. I played it back 3 times, each time hearing it more clearly. Someone invisible, somewhere in the darkness below, methodically working with grain that didn't exist. I decided to conduct an experiment. From my bag, I pulled out a spare battery pack, a small rectangular device about the size of a deck of cards. I placed it on the step beside my feet, noting the time, 2:47 p.m. Then I continued down another 10 steps and waited. The descent felt different now. The air grew thicker, not with humidity, but with presence. Each breath carried the taste of harvests long past, and the floating dust began to form patterns in my flashlight beam, spirals and whirls that seemed almost deliberate. After 5 minutes, I climbed back up to check on the battery pack. It was gone. I searched the step thoroughly, then the ones above and below. Nothing. I checked my watch, 2:52 p.m., 5 minutes just as I'd planned. The battery pack had simply vanished. I continued installing sensors, trying to maintain professional detachment despite the growing unease in my chest. At what I estimated to be 80 feet down, impossible, 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 I found something that made me stop. A wooden sign, old but well-preserved, mounted on the concrete wall. Hand-painted letters spelled out a single word, plateau. Below the sign, the staircase ended at a small landing before continuing into the depths. The landing was maybe 6 feet square, with enough room to stand comfortably. I remembered the old farmer then, the one I'd met at the gas station when I'd asked for directions. His weathered face had grown serious when I'd mentioned the Brenner silo. "You installing those fancy sensors?" he'd asked. When I nodded, he'd grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Don't go down to the plateau. You hear me? Whatever you do, don't step foot on that landing." I dismissed him as another rural eccentric, full of local superstitions, but standing there, staring at that sign, I understood his warning carried weight I hadn't recognized. The floating dust was thicker here, swirling in patterns that resembled faces if you didn't look directly at them. The sound of grain being sifted was louder too, coming from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. I didn't step onto the plateau. Instead, I installed my second sensor array on the step just above it and began my ascent. The climb felt longer than the descent, each step requiring more effort than it should. The dust followed me, clinging to my clothes and equipment despite the lack of any wind or air current. When I finally reached the entrance, I discovered 2 hours had passed. My 5-minute experiment had somehow stretched into 120 minutes. And there, on the second step from the top, sat my battery pack. It was covered in a thin layer of corn chaff, the papery husks that surround kernels on the cob. Fresh chaff, still pliable, as if it had just been shucked. I picked up the device with trembling fingers, brushing away the organic debris. The battery pack was functioning normally, showing no signs of damage or unusual wear. I should have left then. Should have packed my equipment, filed a report stating the location was unsuitable for sensor installation, and never returned. But something about that place had already taken hold. The impossibility of it, the questions it raised, the way it seemed to exist outside the normal rules of space and time. I went back 3 days later. This time, I brought better equipment. A laser distance measure to accurately map the impossible depth. A high-sensitivity recorder for the grain sifting sounds. More items to test the step phenomenon, a pencil, a coin, my backup flashlight. I placed them on the first step at 3 p.m. exactly, then descended to the plateau. The sign was different. The word plateau remained, but underneath, someone had added a new line in fresher paint. Listening depth, 1,847 kernels. The number meant nothing to me, but the phrase listening depth sent ice through my veins. I stood 1 step above the landing, straining to hear beyond the constant whisper of invisible grain work. And then, so faint I almost missed it, I heard my name, not called or spoken, counted. "David," the voice whispered, with the sound of a kernel dropping into a pile. "David," again another kernel. "David," rhythmic and mechanical, like someone tallying inventory. I ran, scrambled up those impossible stairs as fast as my legs would carry me, the counting following me, growing louder with each repetition. By the time I reached the top, gasping and covered in sweat, I'd heard my name spoken 43 times. All my test items were on the second step, covered in fresh chaff. 2 hours had passed. The fourth visit was when everything changed. I told myself I was going back for scientific purposes, to document the phenomenon properly, to gather evidence of something. The truth was simpler and more disturbing. The silo had gotten into my head. I dreamed about those descending stairs, about floating dust and invisible workers. I heard my name being counted when I tried to sleep. This time, I brought a rope. One end tied to my van's bumper, the other around my waist. A physical tether to the real world. I also brought a voice recorder, a camera, and enough batteries to document everything. The descent felt familiar now, almost welcoming. The dust rose to greet me like an old friend, and the grain-sifting sound seemed pleased by my return. I found myself counting the steps automatically, 30, 40, 50, watching for the plateau sign. It appeared at step 73, but the message had changed again. Plateau. Listening depth. 1,847 kernels. David. 43. Husks counted failures remaining. 1,804. My failures. The sign was talking about my failures. As I stood frozen, reading and rereading those words, the counting began again. But this time, it wasn't just my name. David, who forgot his mother's birthday, came the whisper, accompanied by the sound of a kernel being husked. David, who lied about the Henderson account, another husk, another failing. David, who cheated on his physics final junior year. Each confession was true, each failure real. Things I'd never told anyone, mistakes I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten them myself. But the silo remembered. The silo was counting them out, one by one, transforming my sins into seeds. David, who let his father die alone. Husk. David, who stole $20 from the collection plate. Husk. David, who blamed Thompson for the missing equipment. Husk. I covered my ears, but the counting continued inside my skull. The rope around my waist felt impossibly heavy, pulling me not up but down, toward the plateau. My feet moved without my permission, taking that single step onto the landing. The moment my boot touched the plateau, the world shifted. The silo's interior stretched impossibly in all directions. The stairs now spiraled both up and down into infinity, a double helix of rusted metal and worn concrete. The dust didn't float anymore. It crawled along the walls in living streams, forming words and dissolving them before I could read their meaning. And the counting came from everywhere. Thousands of voices, all speaking in unison but slightly out of sync, creating a cascade of syllables that shouldn't have been comprehensible but somehow were. They weren't just counting my failures anymore. They were counting me, dissecting my existence into component parts, categorizing every moment, every thought, every potential future I'd never live. David at 7, afraid of the basement. David at 15, masturbating to Mrs. Garcia. David at 23, considering suicide. David at 31, standing on the plateau. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't respond. The rope around my waist had gone slack. When I turned to look, I saw it had been severed cleanly, the end covered in corn silk. No escape that way. No escape at all, maybe. But then I noticed something else. The counting had rhythms, patterns, gaps between the recitations where silence lived for fragments of seconds. And in those gaps, I heard other names, other lives being tallied and sorted. Benjamin, who abandoned his family. Ruth, who poisoned the well. Carl, who burned the barn with the horses inside. Names from the past. Names from the Brenner farm's history, perhaps. People who had stood on this same plateau, who had heard their own existences reduced to kernels and chaff. The silo wasn't just counting me. It was counting everyone who'd ever entered it, creating an inventory of human failure, sorted and stored in dimensions that shouldn't exist. I forced myself to move, lifting one foot and then the other, stepping backward off the plateau. The moment I left the landing, the world snapped back to its merely impossible state. Just a silo with stairs that descended too far, dust that floated upward, and the sound of invisible grain work. But the counting continued. Fainter now, but persistent. And when I looked at the sign, it had changed once more. Plateau, listening depth, 1,847 kernels. David, 286 husks, counted failures remaining. 1,561 new steps added. 17 inches, I looked down. The staircase, which had previously ended just below the plateau, now continued deeper. 17 new steps, exactly as promised. Vanishing into darkness my flashlight couldn't penetrate. The ascent took 3 hours. With each step up, I heard another failure counted, another husk stripped away. By the time I reached the surface, the sun was setting, painting the abandoned farmland in shades of rust and shadow. My van was covered in dust, not road dust, but corn dust. It was inside the vehicle too, despite the locked doors and closed windows. I drove away without looking back, but the counting followed me. Quieter in the city, almost inaudible during the day, but always there, always tallying. Every mistake, every moment of weakness, every small cruelty, counted and categorized, added to some cosmic inventory I couldn't understand. I tried to return to normal life, filed my report with Agritech, claiming equipment malfunction and recommending the site be removed from the survey. Went back to other assignments, other silos, other measurements, but none of them breathed like the Brenner silo. None of them counted. A week passed, then 2. The counting grew louder each night and I started finding corn chaff in impossible places. In my sealed coffee tin, between the pages of books I hadn't opened in years, under my fingernails when I woke each morning. On the 15th day, I broke. Drove back to the Brenner farm with a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. I needed to understand what was happening to me. Needed to know if I was losing my mind or if the silo was really reaching across space to mark my failures. The structure looked exactly the same, standing against another gray October sky. But when I opened the door, the staircase had changed dramatically. It now descended far beyond what the flashlight could reveal, a spiral of metal and shadow that might have gone down forever. And the sign at step 73 read, Plateau, listening depth, 1,847 kernels. David, 1,523 husks, counted failures. Remaining, 324 new steps. Added, 1,523 final descent available. I stood there for an hour, maybe 2, staring at those words. Final descent available. An invitation or a threat? A promise of answers or a guarantee of madness? The counting had become so loud I could barely think. Not just my failures now, but my successes too, my dreams, my fears. Every aspect of my existence being sorted and shelved. The silo wasn't just tallying my mistakes. It was creating a complete inventory of my soul. I began to descend, past the plateau, past the original ending of the staircase, into the new steps that my failures had created. Each footfall echoed with the sound of kernels falling, and the dust rose so thick I could barely see. The temperature dropped with each spiral, and the air grew heavy with the weight of collected human frailty. At step 500, I found another sign. Sorting in progress. Do not disturb. At step 1000, kernels become seeds. Seeds become truth. At step 1523, the staircase ended at a door. Not metal like the entrance, but wood. Old barn wood, held together with iron bands and decorated with carved symbols I couldn't interpret. The counting was deafening here, thousands of voices speaking thousands of names, creating a white noise of human experience. I reached for the handle, then stopped. Behind that door was either an answer or an ending, possibly both. Once I opened it, there would be no returning to the person I'd been. The counting would either stop or consume me entirely. But isn't that what I'd come for? To understand? To find meaning in the impossible? My hand closed around the handle. The wood was warm, almost alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the counting. I turned it slowly, feeling mechanisms older than the farm engage and release. The door opened onto a vast chamber that couldn't possibly exist. The walls were made of compressed corn husks, reaching up beyond sight. The floor was covered in kernels, millions of them, billions perhaps, each one glowing faintly with inner light. And in the center of it all, a figure sat at an enormous desk made from the same barn wood as the door. The figure was sorting. Its hands, too many hands, I couldn't count them all, moved with mechanical precision, picking up kernels, examining them, placing them in different piles. Some went into glass jars labeled with names I recognized from local cemetery headstones. Others were dropped into holes that opened randomly in the floor, vanishing into depths I didn't want to contemplate. The figure looked up at me with a face that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite anything. It was the suggestion of features, the implication of eyes and mouth, constantly shifting like the dust patterns I'd seen on my first descent. "David," it said, in the voice of grain falling through a sieve. 1,523 failures counted, 324 remaining. Would you like to complete your inventory? I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted. The kernels on the floor began to move, flowing like water around my boots, each one whispering a name, a failure, a moment of human weakness. Everyone gets counted eventually, the figure continued, returning to its sorting. Every soul becomes seed. That's what silos are for, storage, preservation, the keeping of things until they're needed. Needed for what? My voice came out as a whisper, barely audible over the constant counting. The figure paused in its sorting, considering. For the next harvest, of course. Failures become fertilizer. Sins become soil. Nothing is wasted here, David. Everything is repurposed, recycled, renewed. I watched as it picked up a kernel that glowed brighter than the others, examined it closely, then placed it carefully in a jar marked with my name, a jar that already contained dozens of similar kernels, each one presumably representing one of my counted failures. "You can leave," the figure said without looking up. "Climb back to your world." But the counting will continue. Every day, more failures. Every night, more kernels added to your jar. Until you're complete. Until you're ready for planting. Or, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Or you stay. Help with the sorting. Become part of the mechanism that counts and categorizes. It's peaceful work, really. Meaningful. Every soul needs to be measured after all. I stood there, feeling the weight of choice. Above me, far above, was a world that made sense. A world where silos stored grain, not souls. Where failures were forgotten, not transformed into seeds. But it was also a world where the counting would never stop, where I'd hear my inadequacies tallied until madness or death provided escape. Here, in this impossible chamber, was purpose. Terrible purpose, perhaps, but purpose nonetheless. To become part of the machine that measured human worth in kernels and chaff. The figure continued its sorting, patient and eternal. The kernels whispered their names. The walls of compressed husks seemed to breathe with the collective sighs of everyone who'd ever failed at anything. I took a step toward the desk, then another. The counting grew louder, but also more musical. Less condemnation, more catalog. An inventory of existence, neither good nor evil, just necessary. Someone had to do the sorting. Someone had to maintain the records. Why not someone who understood the weight of failure? But as I reached for one of the glowing kernels, ready to begin my new work, I heard something that stopped me. My name, being counted not from below but from above, from the entrance to the silo where someone new had arrived. "David Thompson," the voice called down. "State Agricultural Inspector. We received your report about equipment malfunction." The figure at the desk looked up sharply, its shifting features arranging themselves into something like concern. "You brought someone else here?" I hadn't. My report had specifically recommended avoiding the site. But someone had come anyway. Someone who would descend those stairs, hear their failures counted, add their kernels to the eternal inventory. "Go," the figure said, waving multiple hands toward the door. "Send them away. The harvest isn't ready. Too many souls at once spoils the soil." I ran, back through the door, up the impossible stairs, my legs burning with effort as I climbed toward that voice still calling my name. The counting followed, but fainter now, distracted by the presence of a new soul to measure. I found him at step 30, a young man in a state inspector's uniform, clipboard in hand and confusion on his face. "This structure is condemned," I told him, gasping for breath. "Structural instability. You need to leave immediately." He argued, of course, showed me paperwork, cited regulations. But something in my eyes must have convinced him because eventually, reluctantly, he followed me back to the entrance. We emerged into afternoon sunlight that felt like salvation. "File your report from the office," I told him. "Never come back here. Never send anyone else. Some places need to stay abandoned." He left, muttering about crazy contractors and rural superstitions. I stood by my van, looking at the silo, knowing what waited in its depths. The counting had stopped, at least for now. But I could feel it waiting, patient as gravity, ready to resume the moment I let my guard down. I got in my van and drove away. But I drive back sometimes, park at the rusted fence and stare at that concrete finger pointing at nothing. Because I know something now that I didn't before. The silo isn't malevolent. It's not evil or cursed or haunted in any traditional sense. It's necessary. Somewhere, somehow, there needs to be a place where human failures are counted and stored, where our mistakes become seeds for something we can't understand. The old farmer was right to warn me about the plateau, but he was wrong about the danger. The danger isn't in what happens when you stand there. The danger is in learning that you want to. Because now, when I lie awake at night, I don't hear my failures being counted anymore. Instead, I hear all the failures that aren't being counted. All the mistakes and sins and small cruelties that float through the world, unmeasured, unrecorded, unprepared for whatever harvest the universe has planned. The silo is still there, still breathing, still counting. The door at step 1523 is still open, and the figure at the desk is still sorting. Sometimes in my dreams I'm there with it, examining kernels of human weakness, filing them away for future use. And sometimes when I wake, I find corn chaff on my pillow and know that the dreams aren't entirely dreams. Part of me never left that chamber. Part of me is still there, sorting and counting, preparing for a harvest I hope never comes. But hoping and knowing are different things. The silo knows exactly what's coming. And now so do I. The counting never really stops. It just waits, patient as seeds in soil, for the right conditions to grow. And when those conditions arrive, when the harvest finally begins, I'll be there. Whether I want to be or not. Because that's what it means to be counted, to be measured and inventoried, to become part of the mechanism that transforms failure into whatever comes next. The old farmer died last month. I read about it in the local paper. They found him in his barn, covered in corn chaff, smiling like he'd finally understood a joke that had taken decades to land. His last words, according to his son, were numbers, just numbers, counted out like he was taking inventory of something only he could see. I know what he was counting, and I know why he was smiling. Because once you've been to the plateau, once you've heard your failures transformed into seeds, you understand that the horror isn't in being counted. The horror is in realizing that the counting is a kindness. Without it, our failures just float through the world like dust, meaningless and forgotten. But in the silo, they become something else, something purposeful, something that might, in some incomprehensible future, grow into redemption, or into something else entirely. I still install sensors in agricultural structures, still measure temperature and humidity and air quality. But now I know what I'm really measuring, the breath of spaces that exist between what is and what should be, the respiration of reality's thin places, where the universe does its deepest work. And sometimes, when I'm standing in some other abandoned silo in some other forgotten farm, I hear it. Faint, but unmistakable. The counting. Not just from the Brenner silo, but from all of them. A network of structures, connected by purpose I can't fathom, all engaged in the same patient work. Counting, sorting, storing, waiting for the harvest, waiting for the seeds of our failures to finally bloom into whatever we're becoming. The stairs in the Brenner silo go deeper now. Every time I check, and I do check, unable to stop myself, there are more steps, more signs, more doors leading to more chambers where more figures sort, more kernels of human experience. My jar is almost full. When it is, when that final failure is counted and transformed and added to my inventory, I'll know it's time. Time to descend for the last time. Time to take my place at one of those desks, examining and sorting the kernels of other souls who stumbled into spaces that breathe and count and wait. It's not a fate I fear anymore. It's a fate I understand. Because the silo taught me something fundamental about the nature of existence. Everything gets counted eventually. Every deed, every thought, every moment of being human. And somewhere, in a structure that shouldn't exist but does, it all gets sorted and stored and prepared. For what? I don't know. But I hear the counting growing louder each day, and I know I'll find out soon. The silo is patient. The silo remembers. And the silo is always, always hungry for more seeds. Story 5. The salt was the first thing I noticed when the elevator doors slid open to floor -1. Not the darkness of the corridor stretching before me. Not the way the fluorescent lights flickered with a submarine quality that made everything look underwater. It was the salt, thick and briny in my nostrils, coating the back of my throat like I'd been swimming in the ocean for hours, which was impossible, of course. I was in the basement of my new apartment building, 3 blocks from the Atlantic shore of Niterói. I stepped out before I could think better of it. The elevator doors whispered shut behind me, and the familiar hum of machinery faded as it ascended without me. My bare feet. I'd been heading down to get my mail in slippers that I'd apparently left by the elevator. Touched cold concrete that felt perpetually damp, as if the ocean itself was seeping through microscopic cracks in the foundation. The corridor walls were painted that particular shade of green you only see in old municipal buildings and nightmares, the color of something that's been submerged too long. Patches of what looked like condensation beaded on the surface, but when I touched one, my finger came away slick with something that wasn't quite water. It had substance to it, a viscosity that made me think of the trail a sea creature might leave. I should have turned back. The rational part of my brain, the part that had spent 35 years making sensible decisions, the part that had carefully saved for this ocean view apartment, screamed at me to press the elevator button and pretend I'd never seen that new option on the panel, -1 diving room. But the irrational part, the part that had pressed the button in the first place, despite the super's vehement denial that any such floor existed, that part pushed me forward. The smell grew stronger as I walked. Not just salt now, but something organic. Kelp and fish and that particular rot that comes from things pulled up from deep water. My feet left wet prints on the concrete, though they'd been dry when I entered. The overhead lights buzzed with increasing agitation, creating pools of shadow between their sickly yellow circles. At the end of the corridor, a heavy door stood partially open. The wood was swollen with moisture, the grain raised and rough like driftwood. A placard beside it read, "Diving room residents only," in letters that might have once been brass, but were now green with verdigris. Below it, someone had scratched words into the wood itself. "They remember everything." I pushed the door open. The room beyond defied the architecture of the building above. It was too large for one thing, easily the size of the lobby 3 floors up, though the building's footprint couldn't possibly accommodate such a space. The walls were lined with lockers, the kind you'd find at a pool or beach club, each bearing a small nameplate. The air hung thick and humid, and somewhere I could hear the steady drip of water, though I couldn't locate its source. I found my name almost immediately. 3rd row, 5th locker from the left. My surname etched on a brass plate that looked decades old, the edges worn smooth as if from countless touches. The locker door hung slightly ajar. Inside, a wetsuit hung on a hook, still damp, still smelling of recent use. The neoprene was high quality, exactly my size. A diving mask dangled beside it, the glass fogged with condensation that wouldn't wipe clean no matter how I rubbed it. But it was the wear that disturbed me most. The elbows and knees showed the kind of thinning that comes from years of use. Salt crystals had formed in the creases. The zipper pull was polished smooth from countless pullings. This wasn't new equipment waiting for a first use. This had been worn, repeatedly, though I'd never seen it before in my life. I checked other lockers. Each bore the name of a current resident. The young couple from 4B. The elderly woman who lived alone on the 7th floor. Even the family that had just moved in last week. All the equipment showed similar signs of use. Years of use, though some of the residents had been here mere days. At the far end of the room, where the dripping sound grew loudest, the wall curved inward. As I approached, I realized it wasn't a wall at all, but glass. Immensely thick glass like you'd find in an aquarium. The surface was beaded with condensation on my side, but through it, I could see moving water. Dark water. Ocean water. The impossibility of it made my head spin. We were underground, yes, but inland. The ocean was blocks away. Yet here it was, pressing against the glass with a weight I could feel in my ears. The water wasn't clear like in an aquarium. It was murky, full of particles that drifted past like snow in reverse. Occasionally something larger would move in the darkness, a shadow that might have been kelp or might have been something else. I pressed my face close to the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to see better. The coldness of it shot through my palms, a deep cold that seemed to pull the heat from my body. As my breath fogged the surface, I saw something that made me stumble backward. There were lights in the water, not natural phosphorescence, but artificial lights, the kind attached to diving masks. They moved in formation, a group of perhaps 6 or 7 divers, swimming with the easy grace of long practice. They were too far away to make out details, but something about their movement seemed wrong. Too synchronized, too purposeful, like they were patrolling. A sound made me turn, wet footsteps in the corridor outside. Not the sharp slap of bare feet, but the squeaky tread of diving boots. They paused outside the door, and I held my breath, though I couldn't say why the sound filled me with such dread. After a moment that stretched like putty, the footsteps continued past, fading down the corridor. When I turned back to the glass, one of the divers had come closer, much closer, close enough that I could see the mask, identical to the one hanging in my locker. Close enough to see the wetsuit, worn in the same places. Close enough to see that where the face should be behind the mask's glass, there was only darkness. Not shadow. Absence. I must have made a sound because it reacted. The figure tilted its head, a gesture so human it made the wrongness of the rest even worse. Then it raised a hand and pressed it against the glass from its side. The glove left no print, no trace, as if it wasn't quite touching, wasn't quite there. But I could feel the cold intensify where its palm would be, spreading through the glass like ice forming on a window. That's when I noticed the tapping. Soft at first, almost rhythmic. The figure's other hand was moving, finger extended, tapping against the glass. Not random, deliberate. A pattern. My pattern. The nervous habit I'd had since childhood of tapping my index finger in groups of 3 when anxious. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. Something I'd never told anyone, something probably no one had ever noticed. The diver did it perfectly. I ran. Not walked, not hurried. Ran. Out of the diving room, down the corridor that seemed twice as long as before, my wet footprints slapping against concrete. The elevator took forever to arrive, and when it did, the car smelled of salt and algae. As the doors closed, I glimpsed something at the far end of the corridor, a dark shape in a wetsuit, standing perfectly still, watching. Back in my apartment, I triple-locked the door and went straight to the window. My beautiful ocean view, the reason I'd bought this place. The sun was setting, turning the Atlantic into a sheet of beaten copper. Far out, I could see boats, their lights just beginning to twinkle on. Everything normal, everything real. But as darkness fell and the window became more mirror than viewport, I saw something that made my blood turn to slush. Reflected in the glass, standing behind me in my own living room, was the figure in the wetsuit. I spun around. Nothing. Just my couch, my coffee table, my life exactly as I'd left it. But in the reflection, it remained, patient and still. I've started avoiding the window at night. I take the stairs. I've complained to the super about the smell of salt that sometimes seeps under my door, but he just gives me that look, the one that says he thinks I'm imagining things. Maybe I am. The button for floor -1 hasn't appeared in the elevator since that night, but my feet are always damp now. I wake up with salt crusted in the corners of my eyes. My sheets smell of seaweed no matter how many times I wash them. And sometimes, in the small hours when the tide is high, I hear it, that rhythmic tapping. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, coming from everywhere and nowhere, like something calling me home. Yesterday, I found a receipt in my jacket pocket, from a diving supply shop I've never heard of, for equipment I don't remember buying, dated 3 years before I moved to this city. The signature at the bottom is mine, but older somehow, more practiced, as if I'd been signing that name for decades longer than I have. I've started having dreams, or maybe they're memories. It's hard to tell anymore. In them, I'm underwater, swimming with others in the darkness beyond the glass. We move in perfect formation, our lights cutting through the murky water. We're searching for something, or guarding something, or maybe we are something, though I can never quite remember what, when I wake up gasping, my lungs burning as if I'd been holding my breath. The woman from 7B stopped me in the lobby yesterday. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes like bruises. She grabbed my arm with fingers that were ice cold and damp, and whispered something about the diving room, about how she'd found it too, about how she'd seen me there, underwater, even though she knew I was at work that day because she'd seen me leave. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. The look she gave me, part fear, part pity, made me wonder if I was lying. There's a pull now, constant like gravity, but sideways, always toward the elevator, toward that button that may or may not exist, toward that room that can't possibly be real. My skin feels wrong, too dry, too tight. I find myself holding my breath at odd moments, testing how long I can go without air. Longer each time. Impossibly long. Last night I gave in, took the elevator down to the lobby, meant to go outside, get some air, shake off this feeling. But the button was there again. -1. Glowing softly like phosphorescence. My finger moved without my permission, pressed it before I could stop myself. This time the corridor was flooded. Not completely, just an inch or two of water, perfectly clear, perfectly still. My reflection in it was wrong, older, wearing clothes I didn't recognize, smiling though I wasn't. I didn't go to the diving room, I couldn't, because from down the corridor I could hear voices, multiple voices, speaking in unison, reciting something, names and dates, arrival times, like a manifest. My name was among them, but the date was wrong. According to the voices, I'd arrived in 1987. According to the voices, I'd never left. I've started researching the building, built in 1952 on landfill, land reclaimed from the ocean. The original architectural plans show no basement, but there are newspaper clippings, barely legible, about workers who went missing during construction, about strange sounds from below the foundation, about how they had to stop pumping out seawater 3 times because it kept finding ways back in. The building was almost abandoned before it even opened, but it did open, and people moved in. And according to the records I found, many of those original residents' names match the nameplates I saw in the diving room. Families that should have died decades ago, but whose descendants still live here. Or maybe not descendants. Maybe the same people somehow. Continuing, returning, diving. The salt taste won't leave my mouth now. My eyes burn constantly, but with seawater, not tears. I've caught myself holding my breath for entire conversations, not even realizing until the other person looks at me strangely, and I have to pretend to cough, to cover for the fact that I haven't been breathing. I know what comes next. I can feel it building like pressure in my ears. One night soon, maybe tonight when the tide is at its highest, I'll take the elevator down. I'll walk that damp corridor. I'll put on the wetsuit that fits so perfectly, that knows my body like it's held it 1,000 times before. I'll stand at that thick glass, and this time, instead of looking through it, I'll find the door beside it. The one I didn't notice before. The one that's always been there. And I'll walk through. Into the water. Into the darkness where the others swim their eternal patrol. Where I've always been swimming, even when I thought I was here, dry and safe in my apartment. Because maybe that's the real dream, this life above the surface. Maybe I've been underwater all along, and these moments of surfacing, of breathing air, of pretending to be only what I appear to be, maybe these are the brief fantasies we're allowed between dives. The tapping at my window has started again. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. But now I understand it's not a threat or a summons. It's a reminder, a countdown, a welcome home. The tide is rising. I can feel it in my bones, in the pressure behind my eyes, in the way my lungs ache for something that isn't air. Soon I'll go down. Soon, I'll put on the wetsuit that's been waiting for me since before I was born. Soon, I'll join them in the water beyond the glass. And the strangest part, the part that should terrify me but doesn't, is that it feels like relief, like finally stopping the pretense of drowning in air, when all along, I've been meant for deeper, darker waters. The elevator is calling. The button glows like a lure in the darkness. I think, tonight, I'll answer. Story 6. The notebook appeared ordinary enough when I first inherited it. Weathered leather cover, yellowed pages filled with cramped handwriting from rangers who'd walked these trails before me. Standard stuff, wildlife sightings, trail conditions, maintenance notes, nothing that explained why the previous ranger had quit without notice, leaving only this journal and a hastily scrawled resignation letter that simply read, "I can't tell which one I am anymore." I should have paid attention to that warning. My first week at Blackwood Forest Reserve passed without incident. The isolation suited me fine. After the divorce, I needed distance from everything that reminded me of my old life. The ranger station sat 12 miles from the nearest town, a modest cabin surrounded by towering pines that blocked out most of the sky even at noon. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was absolute, broken only by the occasional crack of branches or distant animal calls that never quite sounded right. The notebook's first peculiar instruction appeared on my 8th day, tucked between routine maintenance logs, written in faded blue ink. Trail 7. Turn back 3 steps before the clearing that seems too inviting. I might have dismissed it as some predecessor's superstition, except the handwriting matched mine perfectly. Not similar, identical. Down to the way I crossed my T's with a slight upward slant. Trail 7 wound through the densest part of the forest, where the canopy grew so thick that hiking it felt like walking through permanent twilight. I found the clearing exactly as described, a perfect circle of sunlight in the oppressive darkness, grass so green it hurt to look at, wildflowers arranged in patterns too deliberate to be natural. The space practically hummed with invitation, like a Venus flytrap waiting for its prey. I counted 3 steps backward and turned around. The trail behind me had changed. The markers I'd passed minutes ago now pointed in different directions. The blue blazes that should have led back to the station instead curved deeper into the woods. My GPS showed my location as a blank spot, the screen flickering between coordinates that placed me simultaneously in 3 different locations. That night, I found new entries in the notebook, my handwriting again. but I had no memory of making them. The trail markers spin when you're not watching. They want you to get lost. They want you to meet yourself. I started documenting everything, taking photos of trail markers before and after my patrols, setting up motion-activated cameras along the paths that seemed most wrong. The images they captured made my skin crawl. A figure in my ranger uniform walking trails I hadn't patrolled. The person had my build, my gait, but the face. The cameras never quite caught the face. Sometimes it was turned away, sometimes obscured by shadow or branches. Once, the figure stood directly before the camera, but where the face should have been was just a smooth expanse of skin, like someone had pressed silly putty over the features until they disappeared. The notebook grew heavier with new rules. Don't acknowledge the sound of your own voice calling from the woods. If you find your own boot prints walking in the opposite direction, follow them only until sunset. The thing wearing your coat knows your schedule. Vary your patrol times. I tried to rationalize it. Stress from the divorce. Isolation playing tricks on my mind. Carbon monoxide leak in the cabin, maybe. I bought a detector. It showed normal levels. Had my head examined at the clinic in town. Nothing abnormal. The doctor suggested I might be sleepwalking, writing in the notebook during episodes I couldn't remember. It almost made sense until I watched myself on the security footage. 3 a.m, the camera outside my cabin activated. A figure emerged from the tree line. My height, my clothes, my measured stride. It approached my door and stood there for 17 minutes, just beyond the motion sensor's range, swaying slightly like a tree in wind that wasn't blowing. Then it walked backward into the forest, each step perfectly reversed, until it disappeared into the dark. I was inside the cabin the entire time. I know because I was awake, sitting at my desk, writing in the notebook. It's learning how to be me better than I know how to be myself. The rules became more specific, more urgent. Check your reflection twice before believing it. If you meet another ranger on the trails, ask them to tell you their middle name. You don't have one. The coffee at the station will taste wrong on Thursdays. Don't drink it. That last one saved me, I think. Thursday morning, exhausted from another sleepless night spent watching the cameras, I made coffee and lifted the mug to my lips. The smell was right, the temperature perfect, but something in my peripheral vision made me pause. My reflection in the window. It had already taken a sip. Steam rose from the reflected mug while mine remained untouched. I set it down with trembling hands and watched my reflection's face twist with something that might have been disappointment. The notebook's most recent entry, which appeared while I was in the shower this morning, is the most disturbing yet. Never accept coffee from yourself. You'll offer it with your own hands, your own smile, your own voice saying you look tired. You'll be so convincing because you know exactly what you want to hear. Don't listen, don't drink, don't become the thing that's been practicing being you. I've started finding evidence of another presence living my life alongside me. Dishes I didn't use in the sink. My bed slept in while I dozed at my desk. Reports filed in my handwriting about patrols I didn't make, describing trail conditions with impossible accuracy. Trails I haven't walked in days somehow documented down to fresh deer tracks and recent storm damage. The other rangers in the district have started mentioning my overtime. Apparently I've been pulling double shifts, appearing at the main office to file reports hours after I've already checked in. They joke about my dedication, but I see the uncertainty in their eyes. Something about me, or the thing they think is me, doesn't sit right with them either. Last night I discovered something that made everything worse. Hidden in the notebook's back cover, tucked behind the leather binding, were photographs. Dozens of them, dating back decades. All showing different rangers, all men about my age and build, all wearing the same expression of exhausted paranoia I see in my mirror every morning. On the back of each photo, the same message in different hands. I don't know which one I am anymore. The oldest photograph, brittle and sepia-toned, showed a ranger from 1952. His face had been scratched out, but underneath someone had written, "He won, now he's both." I've tried to leave 3 times. Each attempt, I've found myself back at the cabin, sometimes with hours missing, sometimes with new entries in the notebook documenting patrols I don't remember taking. The roads out seem to loop back on themselves when I'm not paying attention. The town I drove through to get here doesn't appear on any map anymore. And when I called the number for the ranger service that hired me, it had been disconnected for 15 years. The cameras keep recording. Last night's footage shows two figures emerging from opposite ends of the forest, both wearing my uniform, both with my walk. They met in front of my cabin and stood there facing each other for 3 hours. One of them was me. I remember standing there, staring at my impossible double. But watching the footage, I can't tell which one I was. They're both perfect copies, down to the way they shift their weight when they're nervous. This morning, there was fresh coffee waiting in the kitchen, still hot, made exactly how I like it. A note beside it in my handwriting. "You look tired. You should rest. I'll handle today's patrol." I didn't make the coffee, I didn't write the note, but the handwriting is perfect, and when I looked at the duty roster, my name was already signed in for the morning shift. The timestamp showed I'd checked in 20 minutes ago. I'm sitting here now, staring at that coffee, and I can't remember if I'm the one who's supposed to drink it, or the one who's warning against it. The notebook is open in front of me, and new words are appearing even though my pen isn't moving. The integration is almost complete. Soon there will be only one of us, with memories of being both. Outside my window, I can see a figure in ranger uniform walking toward Trail 7. He has my stride, my posture, the way I hold my shoulders when I'm tired. He pauses at the exact spot where I would pause, checks his watch the way I check mine. I know I'm sitting here. I can feel the chair beneath me, the pen in my hand. But I also remember walking that trail right now, feeling the morning mist on my face, counting 3 steps before the clearing that seems too inviting. The notebook has one final entry, appearing letter by letter as I watch. When you can't tell which memories are yours anymore, you've already lost. The question isn't whether you're the original or the copy. The question is whether there was ever a difference. I reach for the coffee. It smells perfect, familiar, like every morning I've ever known. My reflection in the window has already taken a sip, savoring it with an expression of relief I don't feel yet. Or maybe I do. Maybe I've already drunk it. Maybe I'm the reflection, watching myself through the window, waiting for the original to catch up to what I've already done. The notebook sits between us, between me and myself, and we both reach for it at the same time, our hands meeting on the page, identical down to the scar on the left knuckle from a childhood accident we both remember living through. "Never accept coffee from yourself," we whisper in unison, and I no longer know which one of us is the warning and which is the threat. Story 7. The service call came in at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday until it wasn't. The dispatcher's voice crackled through my radio with the usual monotone efficiency. Air conditioning unit failure, medical building on Riverside, 14th floor. I'd serviced that building dozens of times before. Routine stuff. Nothing that should have made my hands shake as I write this now, 3 days later, in a motel room 200 miles from the city. I keep telling myself I imagined it all. The human mind, under stress, can manufacture entire realities. But the business card in my wallet says otherwise. The one I don't remember taking. The building's lobby was its usual sterile self that afternoon. All polished marble and antiseptic smell that medical facilities seem to cultivate like a badge of honor. The security guard barely glanced up from his newspaper as I signed in, my toolbox clanking against my leg as I walked to the elevators. The 14th floor button lit up under my finger, and I remember thinking how odd it was that the 13 wasn't skipped, like in most buildings. Medical professionals, I supposed, were too rational for superstition. The elevator rose with its familiar hydraulic whine, and I watched the numbers climb. Something was wrong with the display. The digits seemed to pulse, almost imperceptibly, like a heartbeat. I blinked hard, attributing it to the fluorescent lights that always gave me headaches in these places. When the doors opened on 14, the hallway stretched out in both directions. identical doorways spaced with mathematical precision. The work order specified suite 1408, which should have been to the right, past the water fountain that gurgled like a throat clearing. But as I walked, counting door numbers, something felt off about the spacing. The hallway seemed to elongate with each step, the exit sign at the far end never getting closer. Suite 1408 had no nameplate, just the number in tarnished brass. No company name, no doctor's credentials, nothing to indicate what kind of practice operated behind the dark wood door. I knocked, professional courtesy, and when no answer came, I tried the handle. It turned easily, too easily, like it had been waiting. The waiting room was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. Not overtly sinister, just wrong. There was no reception desk, no secretary's station, no magazines scattered on side tables. Just 6 chairs arranged in a perfect circle facing inward, and in the center, a single potted plant that looked plastic, but smelled overwhelmingly of earth and decay. The walls were bare except for one framed diploma, but when I stepped closer to read it, the text seemed to shift and blur, never quite resolving into words. The temperature hit me then, easily 90 degrees, maybe more. The work order made sense now. I set down my toolbox and checked the thermostat on the wall. The display showed 72 degrees Fahrenheit, which was impossible. Sweat was already beading on my forehead, my shirt sticking to my back. I tapped the display and for a moment, the numbers flickered to show 98. 6 degrees Fahrenheit before returning to 72. The examination room door stood slightly ajar at the back of the waiting area. I should have left then. Should have called the dispatcher and reported that the suite was empty, that I'd need authorization to proceed. But something pulled me forward. Not physically, but a compulsion that felt like my own curiosity, even though I knew it wasn't. The examination room was lit by a single overhead lamp that pulsed with a rhythm I couldn't quite place at first. It was subtle, maybe every 2 seconds, a slight dimming and brightening that made shadows dance in the corners. An examination table dominated the center, its paper covering pristine and unwrinkled. On the counter sat a stethoscope, its metal disc catching the pulsing light, and beside it, a manila folder. The folder had my name on it. Not just my first and last name, but my full legal name, including the middle name I never used, spelled correctly with the unusual double L that everyone always got wrong. My hands weren't steady as I opened it. Inside were medical charts, test results, X-rays held up to the pulsing light showing bones I recognized as my own by the old fracture in my left wrist from a childhood fall. But I'd never had these tests done. The dates were all wrong. Some from years ago, some from dates that hadn't happened yet. The first page described a condition I'd never heard of. Progressive reality displacement syndrome. The symptoms listed made my stomach turn. Patient experiences dimensional bleeding, temporal inconsistencies, inability to maintain singular existence focus. The handwriting was clinical, precise, but somehow familiar. The lamp's pulsing grew more pronounced, and suddenly I understood its rhythm. It matched my heartbeat exactly. When my pulse quickened from fear, the light sped up in perfect synchronization. I pressed 2 fingers to my neck, counting beats, and watched the light follow along like a medical monitor. The stethoscope on the counter began to glow with a soft warmth I could feel from 3 feet away. Not hot enough to burn, but warm like skin, like something alive. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to grab my tools and run, but when I turned toward the door, it had closed. Not slammed, not even clicked, just closed, as if it had always been that way. I tried the handle. It turned freely, but the door wouldn't budge, like it was painted onto the wall. That's when the panic really set in, my breathing shallow and rapid, the lamp above strobing faster to match my racing heart. The stethoscope's warmth intensified, and I swear I could hear breathing through it, slow and measured, like someone listening on the other end. The folder's pages started turning on their own, or maybe there was a breeze I couldn't feel. Each page revealed more test results, brain scans showing unusual activity in regions that shouldn't exist, blood work with cell counts that defied biology. The final page made me step back. A surgical consent form for a reality realignment procedure, dated for today, at exactly 4:15 p.m. My signature was already there, in my own handwriting, though I knew I'd never signed it. The ink looked fresh, still gleaming wet, and when I touched it, it smeared across my fingertip in a way that felt too warm, too organic. The room's temperature spiked suddenly, or maybe I just became more aware of it. The air felt thick, syrupy, like breathing through cotton. The lamp's pulsing had become almost stroboscopic, turning the room into a series of still photographs. In one flash, the examination table was empty. In the next, a figure sat there, white coat hanging loosely, face obscured by shadow. Another flash. Empty again. Flash. The figure stood beside me, close enough that I should have felt its presence. Flash. Empty. I grabbed the doorknob again, rattling it desperately. This time it turned and opened, but the waiting room beyond had changed. The chairs were occupied now, all 6 of them, by figures that sat perfectly still, facing that center plant. They wore hospital gowns, their faces slack, eyes open but unseeing. One of them looked exactly like me, down to the scar on my chin from a work accident last year. The me that wasn't me turned its head slowly, mechanically, and when it spoke, its voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The procedure is beginning. The stethoscope was in my hands, though I didn't remember picking it up. It was warm, pulsing with its own heartbeat now. Or maybe it was mine, reflected and amplified. I pressed it to my chest and heard not one heartbeat but dozens, all slightly out of sync, like multiple versions of myself breathing in the same space. The medical chart had new pages now, documenting procedures that hadn't happened yet, but somehow already had. Photographs of surgeries I'd never undergone showed my face peaceful under anesthesia, surrounded by doctors whose faces were always just out of frame or too blurred to make out. The dates on these photos jumped around. 1987, I was 5 years old then. 2019, 2031, yesterday, tomorrow, now. The examination room's walls began to breathe, expanding and contracting with those multiple heartbeats. The diploma on the wall in the waiting room suddenly made sense, the letters crystallizing just long enough for me to read. Doctor, my full name, reality adjustment specialist, licensed in all temporal jurisdictions. The figure in the white coat appeared again, more solid this time, standing by the examination table. When it lifted its head, I saw my own face, aged by maybe 20 years, wearing glasses I didn't need yet. It spoke with my voice but layered, like multiple recordings played simultaneously. You're late for your appointment. You're always late for your appointment. You've never missed your appointment. The folder in my hands grew heavier, pages multiplying, documenting not just medical procedures, but entire life cycles, births and schoolings and careers and relationships I'd never lived but remembered having forgotten. The final page, which kept being the final page no matter how many came after it, showed that consent form. But now there were dozens of signatures, all mine, all different ages of my handwriting from childhood scrawl to shaking elderly script. The lamp above finally steadied its rhythm, settling into a pulse that felt more natural than my own heartbeat. The warmth from the stethoscope spread up my arm, not unpleasant now, almost comforting. The panic was still there but muted, like feeling someone else's emotion through thick glass. The other me, the doctor me, gestured to the examination table. The paper crinkled as I sat. When had I moved? And I noticed the ceiling had no tiles, no normal ceiling at all, just a gray expanse that went up forever, populated by more examination room lights, pulsing at different rhythms, each one corresponding to a different heartbeat, a different version. The condition, the doctor me said, pulling up a chair that hadn't been there before, is not terminal. Nothing ever is, really. It's just a matter of alignment, of getting all your temporal echoes to synchronize. You've been bleeding between realities for years now. Haven't you noticed? The small things, the coffee shop that was there yesterday but not today, The coworker whose name changes slightly. The childhood memory that happened two different ways. I wanted to deny it, but fragments surfaced. The street I'd lived on that sometimes had oak trees, sometimes maples. The car I drove that was blue had always been blue, except for those mornings when it was gray. My mother's maiden name that I could never quite remember correctly. The medical chart now showed a treatment plan. Regular appointments for reality stabilization. Patient must attend willingly for treatment to be effective. Forced alignment results in dimensional scarring. But I'd never been here before. I was certain of that, except the waiting room chairs looked familiar, worn in places where I might have sat. The plant in the center, I knew without looking that its pot had a chip on the back rim. The examination room's paper had a small tear near the headrest that I expected before I saw it. First-time patients, the Dr. Me continued, often experience temporal displacement. You'll remember being here before even though you haven't. You'll forget being here as soon as you leave until you return, which you already have, will have, are having. The room tilted, or I did, the walls bending at angles that architecture shouldn't allow. The me in the waiting room stood up, walked through the doorway, and suddenly I was watching myself from outside while also sitting on the table. The diplopia was nauseating but also clarifying. I could see the threads, gossamer connections between all the versions, all the possibilities. The building helps, the Dr. Me explained, checking my blood pressure with a cuff that materialized from nowhere. 14 floors, but really only one, repeated 14 times. Each floor is the same floor at different temporal coordinates. You took the elevator to your appointment, which you've never missed, which you're attending now, which ended years ago. The blood pressure reading showed impossible numbers, letters instead of digits, colors instead of measurements. The Dr. Me nodded as if this made perfect sense, noting something in the chart that wrote itself as he thought it. The air conditioning, I managed to say, my voice echoing strangely. I'm here to fix the air conditioning. Yes, the Dr. Me smiled with my smile, but sadder. That's always how you remember it at first. The mind creates a logical pathway, a reason for being here that fits your current dimensional position. But you're not here to fix anything. You're here to be fixed, to be aligned, to stop the bleeding between worlds that's slowly tearing you apart. The stethoscope was against my chest again, though no one had moved it. Through it, I heard the building itself breathing, its ventilation system pumping air in rhythms that matched those multiple heartbeats. The 14th floor existed and didn't exist, was the only floor and one of many, was a medical office and a maintenance closet and a void between spaces all at once. Sign the form, the Dr. Me suggested, holding out a pen that felt familiar in my hand, worn where my fingers would grip it. Or don't. You already have. You never will. The signature exists in a quantum state, all possibilities until observed. I looked at the consent form, at my signature that was already there, wet and dry, fresh and faded, in ink and pencil and blood and nothing at all. The procedure's description kept changing. Reality realignment, temporal surgery, dimensional stabilization, soul repair, but the outcome was always the same. Patient will be returned to primary timeline with no memory of intervention. But I'll remember, I said, not asked because I knew. I'll remember not remembering. I'll know something happened without knowing what. The business card, the Dr. Me said, pulling one from his coat pocket. It was blank when he handed it to me, but I knew it would have something on it later, when I needed it, when I'd already used it, for your next appointment, which you've already attended, which is happening now. The room suddenly snapped into sharp focus, too sharp, like reality turned up past its maximum resolution. Every pore in the walls, every fiber in the paper on the examination table, every photon from the pulsing light, all of it too much, too real, too present. Then, just as suddenly, it softened, blurred, became dreamlike. I stood up from the examination table. When had I laid down? And the Dr. Me was gone. Or had never been there. Or was still there, but in a frequency I could no longer perceive. The medical chart lay closed on the counter, my name fading from its cover like disappearing ink. The door opened easily this time, And the waiting room was just a waiting room. Reception desk in place, magazines scattered on normal tables, the 6 chairs arranged against the walls like any medical office. But the plant was still there, in the corner now, and I knew about the chip in its pot without looking. The hallway outside was the right length, the elevator button responded normally, and the descent to the lobby felt like actual movement through space. The security guard looked up this time, nodded as I signed out, and said something about hoping they got that AC fixed soon. It wasn't until I was in my van driving away that I realized I'd never actually looked at the air conditioning unit. My tools were still clean, unused. The work order on my clipboard had changed. Instead of Suite 1408, it listed Suite 1208, 12th floor, completed successfully, signature on file. The business card in my wallet was no longer blank. It had my name, my photo, but the title read, Reality Adjustment Specialist. The phone number was my own cell, the address was my apartment, but underneath in small text. Next appointment, already scheduled. 3 days have passed now. I've driven 200 miles, but every medical building I pass has 14 floors. Even the ones I know only have 10. The motel room's ceiling light pulses with my heartbeat when I'm not looking directly at it. The bathroom mirror sometimes shows me in a white coat, sometimes in a hospital gown, sometimes not at all. I know I should throw away the business card, forget the whole thing, convince myself it was a hallucination brought on by stress or gas leak or something logical and explainable, but I also know I won't, can't, haven't. The appointment is already in my calendar for a date that keeps changing every time I check. Yesterday, tomorrow, right now. The medical chart found its way into my van's glove compartment. I've stopped reading it because the diagnoses keep getting more detailed, more accurate, describing symptoms I'm only now beginning to notice. The temporal bleeding is getting worse. I lost 3 hours yesterday, or gained them, or never had them to begin with. And I answered a phone call from myself, warning about an appointment I couldn't miss. My reflection sometimes moves first. But the strangest thing, the thing that keeps me awake in this motel room listening to my heartbeat sync with the pulse of lights I can't see directly, is that I'm not afraid anymore. The fear has been replaced by something else. Recognition, maybe. Or resignation. Or the kind of peace that comes from finally understanding you're sick, and that there's a treatment, even if the cure might be worse than the disease. Tomorrow, or yesterday, or in a moment that exists outside of time, I'll go back. The 14th floor will be waiting, has always been waiting, is waiting now. The examination room is already prepared, has never been used, is in constant use. The procedure will begin, has been completed, is ongoing. I am the patient. I am the doctor. I am the disease and the cure and the building itself, breathing through ventilation systems that pump reality like blood through dimensional veins. The business card has changed again. Now it's a medical alert bracelet I don't remember putting on, warning about a condition I definitely have. Patient experiences reality fluctuations. If found disoriented, return to primary timeline. Do not attempt to convince patient of singular existence. Multiple states are normal for this condition. The motel room has an examination table now, though I'm sure it was a bed when I checked in. The television shows only medical channels that don't exist, broadcasting procedures that haven't been invented yet. The thermostat reads 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, no matter how cold the room gets. I can hear my other selves in the adjacent rooms, some typing the same account, some reading it, some who never experienced it at all, but remember it happening. We're all waiting for the appointment we've already attended, the procedure that's always beginning, the signature that signs itself. The lamp above me is pulsing now, steady and sure, a heartbeat that might be mine or might be the building's or might be the universe itself, breathing in and out, expanding and contracting, creating and destroying realities with each breath. I know what happens next because it's already happened, is happening, will always happen. I'll drive back to the city, take the elevator to the 14th floor that exists in all buildings simultaneously, and sit in that circle of chairs with the other versions of myself. We'll wait for our appointment with ourselves, doctor and patient, cause and cure, The snake eating its tail in an examination room that smells of antiseptic and earth, and the ozone of reality bending. The business card is blank again, ready to be written, already written, never written at all. But I keep it in my wallet, next to my driver's license that sometimes shows different addresses, different ages, different faces that are all mine. The air conditioning in the medical building was never broken. It was working perfectly, maintaining exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature of a living body, the temperature of reality when it's healthy and whole and not bleeding between dimensions. I'm driving back now, though I never left. The 14th floor is calling, has always been calling. Will call tomorrow when yesterday finally syncs with today. The appointment I can't miss, have never missed, am missing right now. The road signs all point to the same destination, no matter which direction I drive. Every building has 14 floors. Every floor is the 14th floor. Every room is that examination room where I'm already waiting, stethoscope warm against my chest, listening to the heartbeat of a universe that's sick with too much existing, too much possibility, too much me scattered across too many moments. But there's a cure. There's always been a cure. It just requires a signature that's already there, a consent I've already given, a procedure that's always beginning but never quite ends. The pulsing light follows me everywhere now. Street lamps, headlights, the sun itself all beating in time with a heart that exists in multiple chests, in multiple bodies, in multiple realities, all converging on that 14th floor, that examination room, that moment when the doctor who is me will perform the procedure on the patient who is me, while the me who fixes air conditioners watches from a chair in the waiting room, reading a medical chart with my name on it, describing conditions I will have always had. Reality tastes like copper and antiseptic. The business card in my wallet is now a medical degree I never earned from a school that doesn't exist in a year that hasn't happened. But it's valid. Everything is valid on the 14th floor. Everything is true when you're bleeding between worlds. The building is just ahead now, all 14 floors of it, even though I can only count 12 from the outside. But I know 14 is there, has to be there, is the only floor that really exists. The security guard will wave me through because I have an appointment. I always have an appointment. The appointment is now, was then, will be forever. The elevator is waiting, doors open, button for 14 already glowing. I step inside, and for a moment, I see infinite versions of myself, all entering the same elevator in different buildings in different realities, all converging on the same impossible floor. The doors close, the numbers climb. My heartbeat syncs with the pulse of the lights. The 14th floor welcomes me home. Story 8. The first time I saw him, I thought it was a reflection. I'd just moved into the studio on the 7th floor, drawn by the cheap rent and the promise of solitude after months of sleeping on couches. The building was old, one of those post-war brick structures that lean slightly, as if exhausted by decades of bearing witness to urban decay. My window faced another building identical to mine. Same weathered brick, same fire escapes zigzagging down like metal scars, same rectangular windows arranged in perfect symmetry. It was 5 a.m., and I couldn't sleep. The unfamiliar sounds of the new apartment kept jolting me awake. Pipes groaning in the walls, the elevator's ancient cables creaking even when no one was using it. I stood at my window with a cup of instant coffee, watching the city slowly emerge from darkness, when movement in the opposite window caught my eye. A figure stood there, backlit by a dim lamp. Same height as me, same slouch, even held his mug the same way. Left hand, thumb hooked through the handle instead of gripping it properly, but something was off. His mug sat on the right side of the windowsill while mine rested on the left. His lamp cast a warmer glow than my harsh fluorescent overhead. And when I checked my phone, 5:03 a.m., I could have sworn I'd seen him moving around his apartment 10 minutes earlier. I raised my hand in a tentative wave. He waved back, but the gesture felt rehearsed, like he'd been waiting for me to do it first. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop watching. Every morning, I'd wake to find him already up, always 10 minutes ahead of me no matter how early I set my alarm. His apartment was a mirror image of mine, but better. Where I had a fold-out futon that sagged in the middle, he had what looked like a proper bed frame. My walls were bare except for water stains. His had actual artwork, though I couldn't make out the details from across the gap between buildings. The clothes were what really unsettled me. We dressed alike, not exactly the same, but close enough to be brothers, except his shirts looked pressed, his jeans without the frayed cuffs mine had developed. When I wore my gray hoodie, he wore the same one, but somehow it hung better on him, like he'd bought the right size while I'd settled for whatever was on sale. I started timing our routines. When I brushed my teeth for 2 minutes, he brushed for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. When I made eggs, he made an omelet. Small improvements, barely noticeable individually, but collectively they painted a picture of someone who had figured out the optimizations I'd always meant to implement, but never quite managed. The gestures began on a Thursday. I was debating whether to answer a call from an unknown number when I saw him in his window, shaking his head slowly, deliberately. His hand moved in a cutting motion across his throat. Don't answer. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I learned it was a debt collector calling about a credit card I'd maxed out years ago. The next morning, he held up a newspaper and pointed to something, then mimed typing on a keyboard. I couldn't read the article from my window, but I bought the same paper and found a job listing circled in the classified section. Data entry, decent pay, walking distance from the apartment. I applied, got the job. These silent communications became our routine. He'd gesture toward his coffee maker when I reached for instant, point to his running shoes when I grabbed my worn sneakers. Always these small corrections, these minor course adjustments that somehow made each day marginally better than it would have been. I started keeping a notebook, documenting his suggestions and their outcomes. Answer the phone at 2 p.m. Old friend offering freelance work. Don't answer at 7 p.m. Ex-girlfriend, drunk and looking to rehash old arguments. Buy the slightly more expensive groceries. They lasted longer, saved money overall. Take the stairs instead of the elevator. Avoided getting stuck between floors for 2 hours. His success rate was perfect. Every suggestion improved my situation, even if only slightly. My bank account grew. My apartment got cleaner. I started sleeping better, eating better, feeling better. But something cold was settling in my chest, a weight that pressed against my ribs whenever I looked across at his window. Who was he? How did he know? I tried to catch him off guard, waking at 3 a.m., but he was already at his window, coffee in hand, watching me with what I imagined was amusement. I varied my routines randomly, but he always seemed to anticipate the variations, making his own choices that put him perpetually one step ahead. The fog came on a Tuesday morning, unusual for the season. It rolled between our buildings like a gray river, obscuring the lower floors. I stood at my window, barely able to make out his silhouette through the haze. He was writing something on his window, his fingers squeaking against the glass as condensation formed under his touch. The fog thinned just enough for me to read it. Stop copying. The words hit me like cold water. Copying. I wasn't copying him. I was following his advice, his gestures, his suggestions. There was a difference, wasn't there? I grabbed a marker and wrote on my own window, "I'm not copying." He shook his head, pointed at me, then at himself, then drew a line between us with his finger. The gesture was clear. One of us was the original, one the copy. But which was which? That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The air in my apartment felt thicker, like breathing through wet cloth. The walls seemed to lean inward, subtly, just enough to notice if you were looking for it. And the sounds, the pipes, the elevator, they had a rhythm now, almost like breathing. I woke the next morning to find our positions reversed. Every move I made, he mirrored perfectly. I raised my right hand. He raised his right hand. I took a sip of coffee. He took a sip of coffee. But it wasn't simultaneous. He was a fraction of a second behind, like an echo in human form. I tried to break the pattern, making sudden, erratic movements, but he followed each one with uncanny precision. The delay was consistent, maybe half a second, just enough to be noticeable. just enough to be wrong. Then I noticed the light. It had always been brighter in his apartment. I'd assumed from better bulbs or more lamps, but now, watching our synchronized movements, I realized the light itself was different. Where shadows fell in my apartment, his space seemed to glow. Where my corners gathered darkness, his remained illuminated by some source I couldn't identify. As the day progressed, the disparity grew more pronounced. By noon, his apartment was bathed in golden afternoon light, while mine remained stuck in morning's gray pallor. By 3 p.m., my studio had taken on the quality of dusk. Long shadows, dim corners, that peculiar sadness that comes with ending daylight. His remained bright, warm, inviting. I stood at my window, watching him mirror my movements in his pool of light, and understood with a sick certainty that something was being taken from me. Not stolen exactly, but siphoned, drawn across the gap between buildings like electricity, following the path of least resistance. The notebook where I'd documented his suggestions lay open on my desk. I flipped through it, noting the pattern I'd been too eager to see before. Each successful suggestion had been followed by a period where my apartment grew slightly dimmer, slightly colder. Each improvement in my life had cost something intangible but essential. I wanted to stop, to break this connection, but how could I? He'd shown me the better path so many times. Even now, knowing something was wrong, I found myself glancing at his window, hoping for guidance. The next morning, I resolved to ignore him completely. I kept my blinds closed, went about my routine without checking his window, but the darkness in my apartment had deepened overnight. Not just an absence of light, a presence of shadow. It pooled in corners, dripped from the ceiling in slow, viscous drops that disappeared before hitting the floor. By midday, I couldn't stand it. I opened the blinds to find him standing at his window, no longer copying me. He was living his own life now, moving with purpose and confidence while I stood frozen, uncertain how to proceed without his guidance or mimicry. He noticed me watching and smiled, not cruel, not kind, just acknowledging. Then he wrote something new on his window, the letters appearing in reverse so I could read them clearly. Choose. Choose what? Choose how. I wanted to write back, to demand answers, but my marker had dried out overnight, leaving only faint scratches on the glass. Days passed in this new configuration. He lived. I watched. His apartment grew brighter while mine descended into perpetual twilight. Food spoiled faster in my refrigerator. Clocks ran slow. The water from my tap came out tepid no matter how long I let it run. I tried leaving the apartment, spending entire days at coffee shops or the library, but I always felt drawn back to the window, compelled to check if he had any new message, any new instruction. He never did. He just lived his improved life, occasionally glancing my way with what might have been pity or might have been satisfaction. The job I'd gotten through his guidance let me go. Productivity issues, they said, though I'd been doing the same work as always. The friend who'd offered freelance work stopped returning my calls. Even the ex-girlfriend's drunk calls ceased. It was as if I was being edited out of my own life, becoming translucent, insubstantial. I started sleeping during the day, when the darkness in my apartment felt more natural. At night, I stood at the window, watching him sleep in his bright room, wondering if he dreamed of being me, or if I dreamed of being him. The realization came slowly, like developing film in a dark room. Those weren't his suggestions I'd been following. They were my own thoughts, externalized, projected onto this figure who might have been real, or might have been something my mind created to cope with its own fracturing. Every choice he'd gestured for me to make had been a choice I'd already known was right, but had been too paralyzed to make on my own. But understanding this didn't make him disappear. If anything, it made him more solid, more real. Because now I could see the truth written in the brightness of his apartment and the darkness of mine. He was the version of me that made the right choices, and I was the shadow cast by his light. I stood at my window, pressing my palm against the cold glass, watching him press his palm against his window in perfect mirror image. The gap between our buildings seemed both infinite and non-existent. like looking into a mirror that reflects not what is, but what could have been. The darkness in my apartment had become complete now, not even allowing the city lights to penetrate. Only the square of my window remained visible, a portal to his bright world. I could step back from it, lose myself in the absolute black of my studio, or I could keep watching, keep witnessing the life I should have lived. I chose to watch. After all, he would have chosen differently. In his bright apartment, he turned away from the window and disappeared into the depths of his studio. For the first time since this began, I was alone at the window, staring at an empty frame of light. The silence was complete. No pipes groaning, no elevator creaking, no city sounds. Just me and the darkness and the memory of brightness I'd never quite possessed. I raised my hand to wave goodbye to the empty window, and for just a moment I could have sworn I saw myself standing there, in his apartment, raising my hand in response. But it might have been a reflection. These days, I can never be quite sure what's real, and what's just the darkness playing tricks on eyes that have forgotten how to see. Story 9. The Grand Whitmore Hotel breathes differently after midnight. I've worked the night shift here for 3 years, and I still haven't gotten used to the way sound carries through its Victorian bones. Footsteps that echo from floors that shouldn't exist. Elevator cables groaning, like they're pulling weight between dimensions. But it wasn't until last Tuesday that I noticed the 4th floor had grown 2 extra rooms. I first discovered the anomaly during my routine security walk at 12:47 a.m. The hallway, which normally ends at room 418, now stretched further into shadow. 2 additional doors stood where there should have been a wall, 419 and 420. The brass numbers gleamed despite the dust that seemed to coat everything else in that extended corridor. My master keycard showed no data for these rooms. They simply didn't exist in our system. By morning, they were gone. The hallway ended at 418 again, sealed with the same burgundy wallpaper that had been there since the hotel's last renovation in 1987. I might have dismissed it as exhaustion-induced hallucination, if not for the complaints that started flooding in the next night. The calls began at 12:31 a.m. Guest in 416 complained about noise from the room next door. Furniture scraping, muffled conversations, what sounded like typewriter keys clicking in irregular rhythms. I checked our system. Room 417 was vacant, had been for 2 weeks due to a persistent mold issue maintenance couldn't quite locate. I walked up to investigate, my footsteps absorbed by the thick carpet that always smelled faintly of mothballs, and something else I could never identify. Something organic and sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun. The hallway had stretched again. This time, I counted 22 rooms instead of 18. The numbers made no sense. After 418 came 419, then 420, but then 413 and a half, 414 and 3/4, and others that seemed to exist in the mathematical spaces between integers. The air grew thicker the further I walked, pressing against my eardrums like I was descending underwater. I knocked on 417. Silence. Used my key card. The room was empty, but wrong. The furniture was there, but arranged differently than our standard layout. The bed faced the window instead of the door. The desk lamp was a model we'd replaced 5 years ago, and on the nightstand, a rotary phone that shouldn't exist anymore. We'd upgraded to digital systems in 2018. The phone rang. I answered it against every instinct screaming at me not to. Static first, then breathing that seemed to come from very far away, like someone calling from the bottom of a well. Then a voice I recognized but couldn't quite place whispered, "You're in the wrong room." I hung up and left immediately. Back at the front desk, I checked the security footage. It showed me entering 417 and standing completely still for 14 minutes, staring at nothing. On the tape, the room looked normal. Standard layout, modern phone, everything in its proper place. But I remembered those 14 minutes differently. I remembered exploring the room, touching the old furniture, feeling the weight of that rotary phone's handset. The keycard started changing the following night. Guests would drop them in the express checkout box, and when I collected them, some had transformed. Modern plastic cards became thick paper ones with the hotel's logo from the 1960s. Some turned into actual brass keys, heavy and cold, with room numbers that didn't exist, at least not in our current configuration. 404.5 appeared most frequently, always attached to a leather fob that felt damp no matter how many times I wiped it dry. Management treated it like a technical glitch. The day manager left me notes about system updates and temporary bugs in the booking software. But software bugs don't explain the physical keys, don't explain why the security cameras occasionally showed guests in hallways that architecturally couldn't exist, don't explain why I started finding my own handwriting in the lost and found log, recording items I'd never processed. The worst part was the growing certainty that I'd been here before. Not just to the hotel, but to these impossible rooms. Sometimes I'd catch myself knowing things I shouldn't. I knew that 413.5 had a water stain on the ceiling shaped like a butterfly. I knew that 420 smelled like cigarette smoke from a brand discontinued in 1975. I knew that 404.5, that room that appeared and disappeared from the fire escape maps like a printing error, had a view that shouldn't exist, looking out onto a version of the city that might have been, or might yet be. Last night, everything converged. At exactly 12:04 a.m., the system showed a new reservation. Room 404.5. Guest name, my own. Check-in time, 0004. The reservation included notes I didn't remember writing, but recognized as my handwriting. Third time returning guest. Prefers rooms with northern exposure. Allergic to down pillows. Do not disturb between 3:33 and 4:44 a.m. I tried to delete the reservation, but the system wouldn't let me. Every time I canceled it, it reappeared with additional notes. Guest may seem confused upon arrival. Offer complimentary upgrade to executive suite. If guest resists, remind him he's already home. The master key in my pocket felt heavier. When I pulled it out, it had changed. No longer a plastic card, but a brass key with 404.5 etched into its surface. The metal was warm, like someone had been holding it. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. It rose past the 3rd floor, then continued climbing for what felt like minutes, though the building only has 6 floors. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched in both directions infinitely, doors repeating in patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Some were numbered, others had symbols I didn't recognize, and a few had what looked like dates. January 15th, 1963, August 22nd, 1987, November 30th, 2024. Room 404.5 sat exactly where it should and shouldn't be, between 404 and 405, occupying a space that the building's blueprint insisted was a solid wall. The door was already cracked open, bleeding yellow light that flickered like candle flame. Inside, the room was mine. Not like a hotel room I was assigned to, but mine. My apartment from 10 years ago, before I took this job, before everything changed. My old coffee table with the ring stains from years of morning mugs. My bookshelf with titles I'd forgotten I'd owned. My couch with the tear in the left cushion I'd always meant to fix. On the coffee table was a welcome basket, the kind we leave for VIP guests. Inside, instead of champagne and chocolates, were items that made my hands shake. My father's watch that was buried with him. My college ID from a school I'd dropped out of. A photograph of me standing in front of the Grand Whitmore Hotel, wearing a manager's uniform. Not the night clerk polo I knew, but a full suit with a gold name tag, reading, Night Manager, since 1987. I was 23. The math didn't work. Nothing worked. The phone rang. That impossible rotary phone that shouldn't exist. I answered because I knew I'd answered before, would answer again, had already answered in some configuration of time that made perfect sense if you didn't think about it too hard. My own voice spoke from the other end, older, tired, resigned. Welcome back. You're probably wondering about the extra rooms. They're not extra. They've always been here. You've always been here. Check the employee records if you don't believe me. Check the basement files, the ones from before the renovation. You'll find your employment contract. You'll find all of them. I wanted to argue. To insist this was impossible, but I could already feel the knowledge settling into my bones like accumulated dust. The Grand Whitmore Hotel has always had these rooms. They exist in the spaces between seconds, in the architectural impossibilities that old buildings develop like organ systems. And I've always been here to tend to them, to guide guests who stumble into corridors that shouldn't exist, to maintain the threshold between the hotel that is, and the hotel that was, and the hotel that might be. The welcome note in the basket was in my handwriting, but the ink looked fresh. Welcome home. Your shift never ends, but you already knew that. The morning crew will arrive at 6 a.m. to relieve you, but morning never comes to 4:04 You can check out any time you like. That's not just a song reference, it's policy. But you'll always return. You always have. Check the security footage from 1987, 1993, 2001, 2009. That's you at the front desk. That's always been you. I tried to leave. The door wouldn't budge. Not locked. Something more fundamental than that. The door simply didn't lead anywhere anymore. When I looked through the peephole, I saw myself walking down the hallway, checking doors, following the same route I'd followed every night for 3 years, or 30 years, or 300 years. The phone rang again. This time when I answered, I heard the day manager's voice, but distant, muffled, like he was speaking through layers of time. We need you to cover tonight's shift. I know it's your night off, but you're the only one who knows how to handle the 4th floor when it acts up. I wanted to tell him I wasn't scheduled tonight, that I was trapped in an impossible room, but I heard myself saying, "I'll be right there," in a voice that sounded like mine but older, more resigned. The room began to fade, or I began to fade from it. Hard to tell which. I found myself back at the front desk, checking in a guest. The clock read 12:04 a.m. The guest looked familiar, but I couldn't place them. They requested a room on the 4th floor. Something quiet, away from the elevator. I handed them a key to 4:04. It was only after they walked away that I realized the guest had been me, or will be me, or had always been me. The security monitor showed the 4th floor hallway, normal length, 18 rooms. But in the corner of the screen, barely visible, a doorway that shouldn't exist flickered in and out of frame. I've been trying to write an incident report all night, but the words keep changing. I write anomaly detected, and it becomes standard nightly occurrence. I write request immediate investigation, and it becomes situation under control. The only words that stay, that don't shift when I look away, are these. The Grand Whitmore Hotel has always operated at full capacity. All rooms are accounted for. The night shift runs smoothly. The 4th floor maintains its structural integrity across all timelines. Room 4:04 does not exist. Room 4:04 has always existed. The night clerk has been employed since 1987. The night clerk started 3 years ago. These statements are all true. My shift ends at 6 a.m. It's 5:47 now. The sun should be rising, but through the lobby windows it's still midnight dark. It's been 5:47 for what feels like hours. The clock moves, 5:48, 5:49, but the darkness doesn't lift. The morning crew should arrive soon. They always do. They never do. They already have. I've stopped trying to make sense of it. The Grand Whitmore Hotel breathes differently after midnight, and I breathe with it now. Sometimes guests ask me how long I've worked here, and I tell them 3 years because that's what I remember. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between heartbeats, I remember 50 years of midnights, 1,000 check-ins to room 4:04, 10,000 walks down hallways that exist in the spaces between what was and what is. The phone at the front desk is ringing. It's been ringing for 3 years, or 30, or 300. I know who's calling. It's me, from room 4:04, from 1987, from tomorrow, from never. I answer because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. Grand Whitmore Hotel, night desk. How may I help you? The voice on the other end is mine. Will be mine. Has always been mine. I'd like to report a noise complaint. The room next door doesn't exist, but I can hear everything through the walls. I tell myself what I've always told myself. I'll look into it right away, sir. But I won't. I can't. I already have. The fourth floor has 20 rooms tonight. Tomorrow it will have 18. Yesterday it had 37. The number doesn't matter. What matters is that room 404.5 is always there. Sometimes, never, waiting for me to check in, to check out, to come home. My shift ends at 6 a.m. It's always 5:47. The morning crew is almost here. The morning crew will never come. I've worked here 3 years. I've worked here forever. These statements are all true. The Grand Whitmore Hotel breathes differently after midnight. Now I know why. It's breathing with me. Story 10. The first time I noticed the number, it was buried in a corrupted partition table. 7,413, sitting there like a tumor in the code. I'd been working forensic IT for 3 years, long enough to know that patterns in data aren't accidents. But this wasn't just a pattern, this was something else. My lab sits in the basement of the precinct, fluorescent lights humming their constant electric hymn. The smell of old electronics and burnt coffee has become my cologne. I specialize in missing persons cases, extracting final moments from hard drives, reconstructing deleted histories, finding breadcrumbs in the digital wilderness. Most days I find nothing. Some days I find too much. The drive belonged to a software developer who'd vanished 6 weeks ago. Standard recovery protocol: clone the drive, run analysis, document everything. But when I initiated the scan, there it was again. 7413. Not just once. 17 times across different file structures. Directory names, checksums, timestamps converted to Unix epoch. Always those 4 digits, like someone had carved them into the data itself. I should have reported it immediately. Chain of custody is sacred in forensic work. You document anomalies, you don't investigate them. But something made me pause. The way the numbers appeared wasn't random. They formed a pattern, almost like coordinates. That night I stayed late. The precinct grows different after midnight. Corridors stretch longer, shadows pool deeper. The building settles with sounds that could be pipes or could be footsteps. I ran a custom script to trace every instance of 7413 across our entire evidence archive. The results made my skin crawl. 43 cases, all missing persons, all containing that number somewhere in their digital footprint, and all of them had interacted with files I would create, files that didn't exist yet. My hands trembled as I opened the first correlation. A woman's browser history showed searches for a data recovery tool I'd been planning to code next month. I'd only sketched the concept in my personal notebook that morning. Another case contained emails referencing a security vulnerability I hadn't discovered yet, complete with patch notes in my writing style. The fluorescent light above my desk began to flicker. In the stuttering illumination, my monitor seemed to display text that wasn't there. Shadow words between the lines of code. I rubbed my eyes, looked again. Nothing. Then my testing script threw an error I'd never seen. Directory/lab/storage/7413 access denied. Location does not exist. The thing about non-existent directories is they shouldn't throw access errors. They should return null. This was different. This was something pretending not to exist. I checked the building blueprints, cross-referenced with our equipment inventory. Storage room 7413 wasn't just missing from our current layout. It had never been added. No construction permits, no architectural plans, no paper trail. But the error suggested something was actively denying access, which meant something was there. The next morning I tried to forget. Drank my coffee, processed new cases, avoided eye contact with the number when it appeared. My manager stopped by, that practiced smile that meant he knew something. "Heard you were working late last night," he said, drumming fingers on my desk. "Remember what we discussed about coincidences? Pattern recognition can be misleading in this line of work." I nodded, but his eyes lingered too long, and his fingers drummed in a rhythm that seemed almost like 7-4-1-3. That afternoon I couldn't resist. I walked the basement corridors, counting doors. The numbers jumped from 7,412 to 7,414. The wall between them was solid concrete, decades of paint layers hiding whatever was beneath. But when I pressed my ear against it, I heard something impossible. The hum of servers, the whisper of cooling fans. I waited until the building emptied again. This time, I brought tools. The wall looked solid, but walls lie. Hidden panels are rookie stuff in building security. It took 3 hours of careful searching before I found it. A hairline crack painted over so many times it had become nearly invisible. The lock was biometric, but it recognized my thumbprint. The door opened to darkness that seemed to eat light. My flashlight beam struggled to penetrate more than a few feet. The air tasted of ozone and old magnetic tape. As I stepped inside, motion sensors triggered overhead lights, revealing a room that shouldn't exist. Servers lined the walls, but they were wrong. Cases I recognized from evidence, but modified, twisted into configurations that hurt to perceive. Cables ran between them in patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. And in the center, an old CRT monitor glowed with green phosphorescence. The screen showed my employee photo, but I looked older, tired. The timestamp read 2027. Behind the monitor, filing cabinets stretched into shadows. I opened the nearest drawer. Inside, hundreds of cassette tapes, each labeled with dates ranging from 1997 to 2045. My birth year to something else. I grabbed one at random, October 15th, 2009. I would have been 14. An old tape player sat on the desk, the kind we hadn't used since the 90s. My hands moved without thinking, loading the tape, pressing play. Static, then a voice. My voice, but young, cracking with adolescence. If you're hearing this, you found the room. Again. You always find the room. It's October 28th, 2025, isn't it? You're 30 years old. You work forensic IT. The number 7413 brought you here. My blood turned to ice water. The recording continued. I'm recording this in 2009 because future you told me to. Just like you'll tell past me someday. The room exists in a recursion, a loop in space-time centered on the work you do. The missing persons, they're not missing, they're displaced. Every hard drive you process pulls them sideways through dimensional barriers. The number isn't random, it's a warning. Your warning. To yourself. I wanted to stop the tape, but my 14-year-old voice kept talking. The mistakes you're about to make, accessing the quantum partition, running the dimensional trace protocol, opening the cascade files, don't do them. But you will. You always do. Because if you don't, the loop collapses, and everyone you've displaced gets stuck between dimensions. 43 people so far. By 2027, it's hundreds. The lights flickered. On the monitor, security footage played. Me, right now, standing in this impossible room, watching myself watch myself. But in the footage, shadows moved behind me that weren't there. Or weren't there yet. Another tape caught my eye. November 3rd, 2025. 5 days from now. I grabbed it, hands shaking, fed it into the player. My voice again, but exhausted, defeated. You tried to stop it. You always try. Tomorrow you'll delete everything, wipe the drives, destroy the evidence. But the numbers are already in the system. They're in you now. Every time you read them, they write themselves deeper into reality. The room doesn't exist because it hasn't been built. It exists because you'll build it. You already built it. You're building it now. The servers around me hummed louder, harmonizing into something that wasn't quite music. On their screens I saw fragments, conversations I'd have tomorrow, code I'd write next week, reports about my own disappearance dated 3 months from now. I grabbed another tape. December 1987. Before I was born, but the voice was still mine, older, weathered. The loop extends backward and forward from the point of initial contact. You're not the first iteration. You're not the last. The room remembers every version of you that's found it. We all leave messages, trying to break the cycle. But the cycle is what keeps the displaced persons from collapsing into quantum foam. You can't save them without destroying them. You can't destroy the room without becoming it. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Check the bottom drawer. The bottom drawer was locked, but the key was in my pocket. Had always been in my pocket, though I'd never seen it before. Inside, a single folder marked Case 7414. My name was on the label, tomorrow's date, my own missing persons file, filled out in my handwriting, documenting my disappearance from a room that doesn't exist. The last page was a hard drive analysis. My hard drive. From next week. The number 7413 appeared 10,000 times, fractaling through the data like a virus. But there was something else. Audio files, hundreds of them. Conversations I'd never had. Arguments with people I'd never met. Apologies to someone about something I couldn't understand. I played one at random. My voice, talking to someone. Understand that the room isn't a place, it's a process. Every time someone finds it, it becomes more real. Every recording we make adds another layer to its existence. We're not trapped in it. We are it. The missing persons, the numbers, the recordings, they're all just shadows cast by something trying to exist in too many dimensions at once. The recording cut to static, then another voice. Also mine, but different, older or younger or sideways. Don't listen to him. He's from iteration 7412. They always think they understand. The room isn't trying to exist. It's trying not to exist. But we keep finding it, keep feeding it acknowledgement. Every time you document the number, every time you notice the pattern, you make it more real. The only way to stop it is to... The tape eaten by the machine, melting into black plastic smoke that smelled like burning memories. The monitors around me flickered, showing cascading errors, system failures, reality exceptions. And through it all, the number burned. 7413, 7413, 7413. I ran. The door slammed behind me, and when I turned, the wall was solid again. No crack, no seam, no evidence. But in my pocket, the tapes remained. 3 of them, each labeled with dates that made no sense. Physical proof of an impossible room. Back at my desk, I found a note in my handwriting. The room doesn't exist until you find it. The room has always existed. The room will exist because you found it. Stop looking for the room. My computer chimed. New case. Missing person. Disappeared 3 days ago. I opened the drive image, ran a standard scan. There it was, buried in the metadata like a splinter. 7413. I could delete it, alter the evidence, break protocol. But then I heard it, the whisper of tape recorders, the hum of servers that weren't there. In the reflection of my monitor, the room flickered into existence behind me. Empty. Waiting. My manager appeared at my shoulder, that same practiced smile. Find anything interesting? I looked at the screen, at the number that connected everything and nothing, at the cascade of impossible data spreading through our systems like digital cancer, at the record of my own disappearance that hadn't happened yet. Just coincidences, I said. He patted my shoulder, his touch cold through my shirt. Good. Best to leave them that way. After all, you wouldn't want to end up like the others. He walked away, but his reflection in my monitor didn't move. It stood there, smiling, holding up 4 fingers. Then 7, then 1, then 3. I'm writing this now because tomorrow I won't remember. The room takes memories as payment for existing. Each time you find it, you lose something. A day, a week, a year. I've checked my employment records. I've been working here for 3 years. But my first day was 7 years ago. 4 years missing, lost in a room that doesn't exist. The tapes are playing now, though the player is in the room and the room isn't here. Young me is explaining about the mistakes I haven't made yet. Old me is warning about the consequences of stopping. Current me is recording this, adding another layer to the recursion. The number isn't a clue. It's not a warning. It's a count. 7,413 times I've found the room. 7,413 times I've forgotten. And tomorrow, when I see the number again, when I notice the pattern again, when I find the room again, it will be 7,414. The missing persons aren't missing. They're here, in the room, in the tapes, in the spaces between dimensions. And soon, I'll be there too. We all will. Because the room doesn't exist until we find it. But we always find it. We always find it. The screen flickers. A new message appears, typed in real time by no one. Check the room. I know I shouldn't. I know it's the mistake I'm warned about, the error that perpetuates the cycle. But my feet are already moving, my hand already reaching for the door that isn't there. Because that's what the room is. Not a place, but an inevitability, a quantum certainty collapsing into existence through observation. The number burns behind my eyes. 7,414. Tomorrow someone else will sit at this desk. They'll find a hard drive with an unusual pattern. They'll notice the number. They'll find the room. And somewhere, in tapes that haven't been recorded yet, my voice will explain the mistakes they haven't made. The cycle continues. The room exists. The room doesn't exist. The room is waiting. Story 11. The first time I felt the ship's pulse, I thought it was just the heat playing tricks on me. 3 weeks into the repair job, deep in the belly of the Meridian, my palm pressed against a rust-eaten bulkhead that shouldn't have been warm. The metal sweated beneath my touch. Not condensation, but actual beads of salt water that tasted of depths no living thing should know. I pulled my hand away and watched the moisture evaporate, leaving crystalline patterns that looked almost like veins. I've been a naval welder for 15 years. I've worked on destroyers, cargo vessels, even a decommissioned submarine once. Ships are metal and rivets, nothing more. But the Meridian was different from the moment I stepped through her hull breach. She'd been in dry dock for 2 months when our crew arrived. A container ship, 40 years old, pulled from service after what the manifest called structural irregularities. The owner wanted her retrofitted, made seaworthy again. Standard job, good money. The kind of work that keeps you busy enough not to think about how your apartment echoes now that she's gone, how the divorce papers still sit unsigned on your kitchen table. The engineer, a weathered Portuguese man everyone called Pharaoh, showed me around that first day. He'd been with the ship since she was commissioned. As we descended into the lower holds, he kept touching the walls, gentle taps like you'd pat a horse's flank. "Ships remember," he said when he caught me watching. His English was thick but clear. Every voyage, every storm, the metal absorbs it all. I'd heard old sailors talk like that before. Superstition runs deep in maritime work. But when we reached Hold 3, even I felt something shift in the air. The temperature dropped 10 degrees, and my breath misted despite it being August. The chalk markings from the previous shift, measurements for plate replacements, had smudged into shapes that looked almost like words in a language I couldn't read. "We mark fresh every morning," Pharaoh said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The ship, she doesn't like being mapped." The work itself was straightforward at first. Replace corroded plates, reinforce the hull where sea and time had worn her thin. But every morning I'd find my previous day's chalk marks gone. Not smudged or faded, gone, as if the metal had healed over them like skin closing a wound. I started using paint instead. The paint would remain, but by evening it would have migrated, the measurements sliding across the hull in patterns that made my eyes water to follow. After 2 weeks, I started working nights. Fewer questions that way, and the overtime helped distract from the empty apartment. That's when I first heard the walking. The Meridian sat in dry dock 30 feet above the harbor floor, supported by massive steel cradles. No water for miles beneath her keel. But every night around 2 a.m., I'd hear footsteps on the deck above. Slow, measured paces, like someone walking a watch. The first time, I climbed the ladder to investigate. The deck stretched empty under the dock lights, but the sound continued, always just ahead of where I looked, always just out of sight. I mentioned it to the day crew. Most laughed it off. Ships settle, metal contracts in the cold. But one of the younger welders, a kid from the Maritime Academy, went pale. My grandfather sailed on her in the 80s, he said quietly. Said they lost a man overboard during a storm. Never found the body. He swore he could hear him walking the night watch for weeks after. I stopped mentioning the footsteps. The tools were harder to explain away. I'm meticulous about my equipment. A good welder has to be. Every piece has its place, packed the same way for 15 years. But in the Meridian, my tools developed a life of their own. I'd set down a wrench in hold 3, turn away for a moment, and find it gone. Hours later, it would appear in hold 2, arranged with other missing tools in careful patterns, not random scatter. Deliberate arrangements that hurt to look at directly. Shapes that suggested anatomy but wrong. Joints that bent in impossible directions. Proportions that belonged to nothing that had ever walked on land. One night, I found my entire toolkit arranged in a spiral pattern that seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision. When I bent to collect them, the metal was warm and slick with salt water that shouldn't have been there. The taste of it hung in the air, ancient, full of pressure and darkness. I started marking the locations where I left things, photographing the arrangements where I found them. But the photos came out wrong. The tools were there, but behind them, in the shadows of the hold, shapes moved that hadn't been visible to my eye. Elongated figures that might have been reflections, if reflections could exist without anything to cast them. The ship began responding to my voice, whispered conversations with myself. A habit from working alone would echo back minutes later from different parts of the hull. But the voice was wrong, pitched lower, words stretched like they were being spoken through water. Once, frustrated with a stubborn bolt, I cursed under my breath. The curse came back to me an hour later from 3 decks down, but in a voice that had never breathed air. Pharaoh found me one night staring at a section of hull where my reflection shouldn't have been possible. The metal was matte, corroded, but I could see myself in it clear as a mirror, except the reflection was wrong. It moved a half second off from my actual movements, and its mouth formed words I wasn't speaking. "You need to leave," he said simply. "Some ships, they choose their crew. The Meridian, she's choosing you. That's insane." He pulled up his sleeve. Scars covered his forearm, perfect circles the size of rivets, arranged in neat rows. 40 years I work on her. On 40 years she calls me back. First just dreams, the sound of water where no water should be, the feeling of drowning in open air. Then the marks appear. He touched one of the scars gently. One for every year. She brands her crew. I wanted to laugh, to walk away. But that morning I'd found a circle of red on my shoulder, perfectly round, the size of a rivet. It didn't hurt, but it was warm to the touch, and when I pressed it, I tasted salt water. The dream started that night. I stood on the Meridian's deck, but she was at sea, cutting through waves black as oil under a starless sky. The crew around me moved wrong, their joints bent in too many places, their faces smooth where features should have been. They worked in perfect synchronization, maintaining a ship that maintained itself, salt sweat bleeding from their pores to seal any damage, their bodies slowly becoming part of the vessel. I woke to find my sheets soaked with brine. The next day, I tried to quit, went to the foreman's office, ready to walk away from the job, the money, everything. But when I opened my mouth to speak, salt water poured out. Not much, just a trickle, but enough that I couldn't form words. The foreman stared as I coughed and gasped, finally managing to croak out something about needing the day off. He gave it to me, concern creasing his face. But I couldn't leave. Sitting in my apartment, I could feel the Meridian pulling at me like a tide. My skin itched where the rivet mark had appeared. Now there were 3, forming a triangle on my shoulder. When I showered, the water beating on my skin tasted of the deep ocean. That night, I went back. Not because I wanted to, but because being away was worse than being there. The ship hummed when I entered, a subsonic vibration that resonated in my bones. My tools were already arranged in hold 2, laid out in the shape of something that might have been human once. Might be human again if the proportions shifted just right. I found Pharaoh in the engine room, his hands pressed against the main boiler that hadn't held fire in years. It was warm anyway, pulsing with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. "She was never just a ship," he said without turning around. "The steel came from a decommissioned vessel, yes, but that one came from another, and another before that. Metal memory going back centuries, maybe longer. Ships that sailed routes no chart shows anymore, carrying cargo that wasn't meant for human ports. Why don't you leave?" He turned then, and I saw that the scars had spread up his arms, across his chest, circular marks like rivets holding him together. "Leave? I am part of her now. We all are, all who've worked her bones. When she returns to the sea, we go with her. That's what she's preparing for. The retrofit. There is no retrofit. The owner died 3 months ago. No one's paying for this work. But we continue, yes? We come every day, do our tasks because she needs us to make her ready. Soon now. Very soon." I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the deck. The metal beneath them was warm, pulsing, alive. In the distance, I could hear the footsteps again, but now I recognized the gate. It was mine, walking rounds I hadn't walked yet, checking repairs I hadn't made yet, in a time when the boundary between ship and self had dissolved completely. The marks on my shoulder burned. When I looked, there were 7 now, forming a pattern that hurt to perceive directly. My reflection in the boiler's burnished surface showed more, marks spreading across my chest, my back, connecting in geometries that human flesh shouldn't accommodate. "The sea calls her home," Pharaoh whispered. "And she takes her crew with her. Not the men who sail her, but the ones who know her bones, who've worked inside her body. We're already more hers than our own." I felt it then, the truth of it resonating through every rivet mark on my skin. The Meridian wasn't being repaired. She was preparing, gathering what she needed for a voyage that had nothing to do with human ports or cargo manifests. And I was part of that preparation, my hands doing work my mind couldn't fully grasp, following patterns that existed in the metal's memory rather than any blueprint. The footsteps on the deck grew louder, multiplied. Not one walker now, but dozens, all pacing in perfect synchronization. Through the portholes, I saw lights that shouldn't exist. Dry dock was dark at this hour, but these were the lights of a working ship at sea. Navigation lights cutting through fog that wasn't there, or wasn't there yet. I work days now, and nights too. I don't remember going home anymore, though I must, because sometimes I'm in my apartment staring at divorce papers I can't recall signing, their ink running with salt water that drips from my fingers. The marks cover most of my torso now, perfect circles that pulse with the rhythm of waves I've never sailed. The other workers avoid me. They see me talking to bulkheads, pressing my ear to the hull to hear whispers that come from inside the metal itself. They don't understand that the ship is almost ready, that soon she'll slide back to the sea despite the dry dock, despite physics, despite everything that says a ship needs water to sail. But the Meridian makes her own ocean. I've seen it in the holds at night, puddles of black water that appear without source, spreading across the deck in patterns that map currents from seas that charts don't show. Fish swim through the air in the lower holds, translucent things with too many eyes, practicing for waters that exist somewhere between here and nowhere. Pharaoh says we're close now. The ship only needs a few more things. A few more hands to work her engines that will run without fuel, to maintain her hull that will sail through more than just water. He shows me the crew quarters that shouldn't exist, cabins that weren't in the original blueprints, beds that look slept in though no one's been aboard for months. My name is already stenciled on one of the doors in letters that corrode and heal, like breathing. I know I should be afraid. Some part of me, growing smaller each day, screams that this is wrong, that metal doesn't live, that ships don't choose their crews. But that voice sounds like it's coming from very far away now, muffled by fathoms of dark water. Tonight, she'll sail. I know because my rivet marks are complete, covering me like a second skin of perfect circles. When I sweat, it's salt water. When I speak, I taste the deep ocean. The Meridian thrums with anticipation, her metal warming, sweating, breathing. The others are already aboard. Pharaoh and men I don't recognize but know. Their faces familiar from dreams of voyages that haven't happened yet. We take our positions without speaking, knowing our roles through the metal's memory rather than any training. The footsteps on the deck have stopped. We are the footsteps now. As I write this, the tide that doesn't exist is rising. Water that shouldn't be here pools around the dry dock's supports. The Meridian groans, eager, ready, alive in ways that ships shouldn't be. My pen leaves trails of salt water on the page. The words swim before my eyes, rearranging themselves into languages older than human speech. I can hear her calling, not with horns or bells, but with the voice of the deep, the sound of pressures that would crush normal men, of currents that flow between what is and what should never be. The sun sets, though it's midnight. The stars wheel in patterns that hurt to perceive. The Meridian shifts in her cradle, and I feel it in my bones that are becoming her bones, my blood that tastes of bilge water and brine. We're going home, not to any port on any map, but to the seas between seas, where ships like the Meridian have always sailed, carrying crews that are more metal than meat, more memory than man. I should resist. That small, drowning voice says I should run, call for help, do something. But my hands are already at work, performing tasks I don't understand but know intimately, maintaining a ship that maintains me in return. The dock is flooding now with water that reflects no light. The Meridian rises on a tide that exists because she needs it to. And I rise with her, my feet fused to her deck, my reflection in her metal showing something that might have been human once, might remember being human, but is something else now. Something that belongs to the sea that isn't a sea, something that sails on the Meridian forever, maintaining her as she maintains us, in the space between rust and flesh, between memory and metal, between the world that makes sense and the one where ships choose their crews and sail through more than just water. The morning crew will find us gone. The dry dock empty, no sign of water, no explanation for how a 40-year-old container ship simply vanished. They'll investigate, file reports, eventually forget. But sometimes on certain nights when the moon is dark and the tide pulls wrong, they'll hear us. The sound of footsteps on a deck that isn't there, the groan of metal that breathes, the whisper of names and voices that have forgotten how to be human. And maybe if they're unlucky, they'll find work on another old ship, one that sweats salt water and erases chalk marks, one that arranges tools and patterns that hurt to perceive, one that's choosing its crew. The Meridian is sailing now, though we never left the dock, sailing through spaces between spaces, with a crew that's learning how to be what she needs us to be. And I'm changing, feeling my bones become steel, my blood become brine, my thoughts become the endless repetition of maintenance on a ship that will sail forever through seas that shouldn't exist. I am the Meridian's now, and she is mine. And we are something else, something that has no name in any language spoken above the waters, something that sails forever in the salt and steel. Story 12. The fluorescent lights never flickered at Apex 24. That should have been my first warning. I discovered the place at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, insomnia gnawing at my skull like it had for weeks. The gym sat wedged between a shuttered print shop and a parking garage, its neon sign pulsing steadily against the pre-dawn darkness. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see rows of pristine equipment bathed in that unwavering white light. No shadows, no dim corners, just relentless illumination that made everything look hyper-real, like a movie set waiting for actors. The membership was surprisingly affordable. The girl at the desk, though calling her a girl seemed wrong somehow, she had the timeless quality of a mannequin, processed my application without looking at the screen. Her fingers moved across the keyboard in perfect rhythm. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 pause. never varying, never hesitating. Your optimal training window is 3 a.m. to 5 a.m., she said, sliding a key fob across the counter. The plastic was still warm, as if freshly molded. The facility adapts to your needs during off-peak hours. I almost asked what she meant, but her smile widened just enough to make the question die in my throat. That first workout felt incredible. The gym was empty except for me, and the silence was so complete I could hear my blood moving through my veins. The weights seemed to adjust themselves. I'd reach for a 40-pound dumbbell and find it was exactly the resistance I needed. Not too heavy, not too light. The mirrors lining the walls created an infinity effect, countless versions of me curling in perfect synchronization. Except sometimes, in my peripheral vision, one of them would lag behind. I'd turn to look directly, and everything would sync up again. Just tired eyes, I told myself. Just the lack of sleep playing tricks. But the cameras were harder to explain away. Security cameras, black domes nestled in the ceiling corners, all pointed at the exits during normal hours. I'd noticed them during my tour, standard security setup. Yet when the gym emptied out, and it always emptied out completely when I arrived, as if everyone else's workout ended the moment I swiped in, those cameras would pivot. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, tracking my movement from machine to machine. I tested it once, walking in deliberate patterns, doubling back, stopping suddenly. The cameras followed with a slight delay, like they were learning my behavior rather than simply recording it. The mirrors were worse. At first, I thought it was the harsh lighting creating some kind of optical illusion, but the delay became undeniable. I'd bench press, watching my chest rise and fall with each rep, and the reflection would follow a heartbeat behind. Not much, maybe half a second, but enough to create this nauseating disconnect between action and image. Like watching yourself on a video call with bad lag, except you're right there, close enough to fog the glass with your breath. 3 weeks in, a trainer appeared. He materialized beside the squat rack as I was warming up, wearing the gym's branded polo so crisp it could have been painted on. "I've been analyzing your form," he said without introduction. His face was generically handsome, forgettable the moment you looked away. "You're pronating your left wrist 13 degrees more than your right during pulls. You shift your weight to compensate for a childhood ankle injury you don't remember having. Your breathing pattern suggests elevated cortisol that peaks at 4:17 a.m. The workout plan he handed me was printed on paper that felt too smooth, too perfect. Each exercise was annotated with corrections for habits I didn't know I had. Adjust grip width to account for favoring right shoulder during sleep. Compensate for tendency to hold breath during emotional suppression. Strengthen lower back to support posture adopted while watching screens in dark rooms." I wanted to ask how he knew these things, but his eyes, I couldn't tell what color they were. They seemed to shift, adapting to the light like those transition lenses, never quite settling on a shade I could name. The plan worked, though. God help me, it worked better than anything I'd tried before. My body responded like it had been waiting for these exact exercises, these precise adjustments. The chronic ache in my lower back vanished. My shoulders squared themselves. I started sleeping, really sleeping, for the first time in years. But the sleep brought dreams I couldn't quite remember, just the sensation of movement, of reps continuing long after I'd stopped counting. I'd wake with my muscles sore in places I hadn't worked, my fitness app showing calories burned during hours I'd been unconscious. The app was another thing. Apex 24's proprietary software tracked everything: heart rate, form, progress, recovery. It knew when I'd arrived before I did, had my workout queued up. Machines somehow always available in the exact order I needed them. But there was this other profile linked to mine. A workout partner, the app called it, though I'd never agreed to any partner. Same height, same weight, same starting lifts as me. But consistently 2% ahead in every metric. Every pound I added to my bench, he'd already lifted 2 days ago. Every mile time I shaved off, he'd beaten by seconds. His profile photo was blurred, but the silhouette looked familiar. The username was just a string of numbers that hurt to look at directly. I tried to ignore it, focused on my own progress. But the morning I hit a personal record on deadlifts, plates clanging, endorphins flooding, that perfect moment of triumph, I checked the app to log it and found my partner had hit the same weight an hour ago. Impossible. I'd been alone in the gym since 3 a.m., unless I hadn't been. The mirrors started showing more inconsistencies, not just delays now, but differences. The reflection's form was better, smoother, more controlled. When I struggled with the last rep, fighting gravity and fatigue, my reflection would complete it with ease. When I grimaced with effort, it remained calm, almost serene. Once, I swear I saw it rack the weights while I was still mid-lift. I decided to test something. One night I stopped mid-workout, walked to the mirror and stood perfectly still. My reflection stood still too. I waited, watching, until my eyes burned from not blinking. Then, just as I was about to give up, I saw it. The reflection's chest expanded with an inhale I hadn't taken. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and my reflection stumbled too, but forward, toward the glass, catching itself with a palm against the mirror's surface from the wrong side. I left immediately, didn't even re-rack my weights, but the next morning, my body craved the gym with an intensity that felt external, like someone else's desire injected into my nervous system. I found myself driving there at 3 a.m. without remembering the decision to go. The trainer was waiting by the entrance, that impossible-to-remember face arranged in what might have been concern. "You didn't finish yesterday's session," he said. "Your partner completed it for you." "I don't have a partner." His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his transitional lens eyes. "Everyone has a partner. That's how we optimize. One learns, one performs, one struggles, one succeeds. The perfect form requires both." "I want to cancel my membership." "You're making exceptional progress. Your sleep quality has improved 73%. Your resting heart rate is down. Your testosterone levels are optimizing." He rattled off statistics I hadn't given them permission to track. Metrics that required blood tests, brain scans, invasive monitoring. Why would you want to stop becoming your best self? I pushed past him to the front desk. The same ageless girl was there, fingers moving in that mechanical rhythm across her keyboard. Tap, 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 pause. "I need to cancel my membership. Now." She looked up, and for the first time I realized her eyes were the exact same shifting non-color as the trainer's. "Are you sure? You're so close to achieving perfect form." "I'm sure. Cancel it." She typed something, and the turnstile I'd just walked through chimed. The LED display flashed. "Congratulations." "Congratulations on what?" "On your decision," she said, that mannequin smile stretching wider. "Your partner will be so pleased. He's been waiting for you to integrate." The mirrors along the wall reflected me standing at the desk, but in every one, my posture was slightly different. Shoulders broader in one, stance wider in another, each reflection making micro-adjustments, perfecting the form. I turned to look directly at them, and they all turned in unison. But not quite. The closest one moved first, the others following in a wave, like they were teaching each other the movement. "The integration process is painless," the trainer said. He'd appeared beside me without footsteps. "You've already been preparing for weeks. Every workout, every rep, every breath has been synchronizing you. Your partner knows your limits better than you do. He's everything you could be without fear, without fatigue, without doubt." I ran, shoved through the turnstile that chirped "congratulations" again, burst onto the empty street where my car waited under a streetlight that hadn't been there before. The key fob burned in my pocket, hot enough to hurt, but I didn't dare throw it away. Something told me it would just reappear, warm and waiting, like it had never left. I haven't been back to Apex 24. It's been 6 days, but my body has maintained the routine without me. I wake up sore, sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of metal in my mouth like I've been breathing hard. My fitness app shows workouts I didn't do, personal records I didn't set, that partner profile creeping closer to perfect synchronization. 98% matched now, 99% this morning. The membership auto-renewed yesterday. The charge on my card was for 2 people. Last night, I caught my reflection getting ready for bed while I was still brushing my teeth. This morning, it was already dressed in gym clothes when I woke up naked. It stood there in the bathroom mirror, waiting, patient, perfect form achieved at last. The key fob sits on my nightstand, pulsing with heat like a heartbeat that isn't mine. Or maybe it is mine. The better mine. The optimized mine. The one that never skips leg day, never doubts the last rep, never questions what's happening in those eternal fluorescent lights that don't flicker, can't flicker, won't ever let the shadows in to hide what's really watching from behind the glass. I can feel it pulling me back. Not tonight, I tell myself. Not tonight. But my reflection is already lacing up its shoes, and somewhere in that perpetually lit gym, the cameras are swiveling toward the door, waiting. The trainer is printing out a new plan with corrections for resistance I haven't shown yet. The turnstile is preparing its congratulations. I check the app one more time. The partner profile has updated. The blurred photo is clearing up, pixels arranging themselves into features I recognize but don't want to admit I recognize. It's scheduled a workout for 3 a.m. for both of us. The alarm is already set. I didn't set it. When it goes off, I know which one of us will answer it, and I know which one of us will watch from the wrong side of the mirror, practicing the perfect form over and over and over, until we're indistinguishable, until the integration is complete, until I can't remember which side of the glass I started on. The key fob pulses. The alarm will ring in 3 hours. My reflection is already warming up. Story 13. The fluorescent lights hummed like dying insects as I stood before Unit 447B, key trembling in my hand. The auctioneer had practically given it away. Nobody wanted a storage box filled with too much repetitive junk, he'd said with a nervous laugh that didn't reach his eyes. $23. That's all it cost me to buy what I would later understand was not a storage unit, but a mirror held up to time itself. The metal door rolled up with a shriek that made my teeth ache. The smell hit me first. Not musty or abandoned like you'd expect, but familiar. Like my own apartment. Like the inside of my car on a hot day. Like the jacket I was wearing at that very moment. I stepped inside, and the automatic overhead light flickered to life, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Boxes lined the walls, stacked with obsessive precision. Each one labeled in handwriting that made my stomach turn. It was mine, but wrong somehow, like looking at your reflection in disturbed water. The first box I opened contained a denim jacket, navy blue, worn at the elbows, with a cigarette burn on the left sleeve from when I'd brushed against someone at a bar 3 years ago. But that wasn't possible. I was wearing that exact jacket. I touched the hole in my pocket where I'd lost my spare car key last month, then reached into the jacket from the box. My fingers found an identical tear in the exact same spot. The fabric felt warm, as if someone had just taken it off. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but my hands were shaking too badly. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Maybe it was the same brand, maybe holes in pockets were common. But then I found the notebook. Spiral-bound, blue cover slightly bent at the corner where I always shoved it into my bag. I opened it to find my handwriting filling the pages. Not similar, but identical down to the way I crossed my sevens and the slight leftward slant when I wrote quickly. The first few pages contained old grocery lists, meeting notes from work. Normal. Then I reached the entry dated 3 days ago. Tuesday meeting with Henderson, 2 p.m. Pick up dry cleaning. Call mom about dinner. Sunday storage unit auction. Riverside facility. My mouth went dry. I'd written that exact list in my notebook, the one in my bag. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my actual notebook and compared them side by side. Identical. Every loop, every crossed T, even the small coffee stain in the upper right corner where I'd set my mug down carelessly. But the notebook from the storage unit kept going. The next page was dated tomorrow. Call in sick. Migraine replace bathroom lock. Don't answer unknown numbers after 3 p.m. The page after that, the day after tomorrow. Then the next week, meetings I hadn't scheduled yet, grocery lists for food I hadn't planned to buy, a reminder to pick up a prescription for medication I'd never heard of. The entries continued for 3 more weeks before ending abruptly mid-sentence. The man at Unit 447B says, a phone rang. The sound came from deeper in the unit, buried beneath a stack of boxes. Not a modern ringtone, the actual bell and hammer ring of an old landline. I hadn't seen a phone when I'd first looked around, but now the sound was unmistakable, insistent. 3 rings, 4. On the 5th, an answering machine clicked on. My own voice filled the storage unit, but speaking words I'd never said. You've reached... Well, you know who you've reached. Leave a message after the beep. Beep. Hey, it's me calling from next Thursday. The voice was also mine, but exhausted, strained. I know you just found the notebook. Don't call in sick tomorrow. Trust me. And whatever you do, don't go back to the apartment tonight. Sleep in your car if you have to. The bathroom lock. The message cut off. I stood frozen, listening to my own blood pound in my ears. The storage unit felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. I grabbed the notebook and the jacket, evidence, proof I wasn't losing my mind, and turned to leave. That's when I noticed the lights in the corridor. They were turning on one by one, starting from the far end. Click, pause, click, pause, like footsteps made of light, approaching slowly. But there was no one there. Just the gradual illumination revealing empty concrete and closed metal doors. Click. Pause. The light directly outside my unit flickered on. I slammed the rolling door down and fumbled with the padlock, my fingers slick with sweat. The metal was ice cold despite the warm evening. As I hurried toward the exit, I could hear other storage units beginning to open behind me. The grinding roll of metal on metal. First one, then another, like some massive creature stretching awake. The security office was a small booth near the entrance gate. Through the window, I could see banks of monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the facility. The guard's chair was empty, but the screens were all active, cycling through different views. I was about to leave when I saw myself on one of the monitors, but I was wearing different clothes. The timestamp showed today's date, but 11:47 p.m., 4 hours from now. I watched myself on the screen walking down the same corridor I'd just left, but in the opposite direction, moving with purpose toward Unit 447B. I was carrying something, a box, and my face looked haggard, desperate. The me on the screen reached the unit, opened it with a key I didn't recognize, and placed the box inside. Then I looked directly at the camera and mouthed a single word before the feed cut to static. Run. I fled the facility, tires squealing as I pulled onto the main road. My apartment was 20 minutes away, but the answering machine message echoed in my head. Don't go back to the apartment tonight. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour diner and sat in the brightest booth I could find, spreading out the jacket and notebook like evidence of a crime I couldn't name. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking, and I noticed she kept glancing at me with something like recognition, or was it pity? When she brought the check, she hesitated before speaking. You were here last week, she said quietly. Same booth. You told me to give you this. She pulled out an envelope from her apron. My name was written on it in my handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line. Unit 447B is not a storage space. It's a return bin. My hands started shaking again. I wasn't here last week. She looked at me with those pitying eyes. You were. You ordered the same thing. Black coffee, nothing else. You sat there for 3 hours writing in that notebook. She pointed to the one from the storage unit. You said someone would come looking exactly like you, and I should give them the envelope. The diner suddenly felt too bright, too exposed. Every reflection in the window could be another version of me. Every customer could be watching, waiting. I left cash on the table and drove to a motel on the outskirts of town, paying in cash, signing the register with a name that wasn't mine. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and old cigarettes. I deadbolted the door, pulled the curtains tight and sat on the bed with the notebook. I had to know what came next, had to understand what was happening. The entries after tomorrow grew increasingly frantic. Day 3. The bathroom lock broke on its own. Something was inside, waiting. Day 5. Found another key to 447B in my kitchen drawer. I've never owned this key. Day 8. The things in the unit are multiplying. My winter coat is there now, but I'm wearing it. Day 11. Saw myself at the grocery store. He ran when I approached. Day 14. The facility manager says I've had the unit for years. Showed me contracts with my signature dating back to before I was born. Day 17. They're not copies. They're returns. Day 19. I understand now. We don't own things. We borrow them from somewhere else, and eventually, they go back. Day 20. I'm going back too. The last entry was from day 21, barely legible. The man at Unit 447B says, "A knock at the motel door made me jump. Soft, polite, almost apologetic. Maintenance," a voice called. My voice. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The doorknob turned slowly, testing. The deadbolt held. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness. Not the darkness of night, but something thicker, more complete. The knocking came again, this time from the bathroom door inside the room. The notebook fell from my numb fingers as I watched the bathroom doorknob turn. I'd locked it when I'd arrived, paranoid and thorough. The lock clicked open anyway, the sound sharp in the silence. The door swung inward, revealing not the bathroom but the corridor of the storage facility, fluorescent lights humming their insect song. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. Me, but wrong. Wearing clothes I'd donated to charity years ago, holding keys I'd lost. His face gaunt with exhaustion I hadn't earned yet. "You need to come back," he said, with my voice but not my words. "Everything goes back eventually. The jacket, the notebook, the keys." He stepped aside, revealing more versions of myself stretching down the corridor, each one slightly different, older, younger, wearing clothes from different periods of my life. We all go back. I ran, burst through the motel room door into the parking lot, not caring that it should have led to the bathroom, not questioning the impossibility. My car started on the first try, and I drove without destination, just needing to move, to not be still long enough for whatever was happening to catch up. But at every red light, I saw them, versions of myself walking along the sidewalk, sitting in other cars, working in lit office buildings, all of them glancing at me with that same expression, pity mixed with resignation, like they knew something I was still refusing to accept. My phone rang. Unknown number. Despite the warning in the notebook, I answered. "Stop running." My own voice, but older, tired. "Check your pocket." The line went dead. In my jacket pocket, the one with the hole, my fingers found something that hadn't been there before. A key. Brass, worn smooth with use. A small tag attached with twine. Unit 447B, permanent resident. I pulled into my apartment complex as dawn broke, exhausted beyond measure. The parking lot was nearly empty, peaceful in the early morning light. But my apartment door stood open, though I'd locked it when I'd left for the auction yesterday. The bathroom door was also open, and from inside came the sound of running water. On my kitchen table sat a box, the same box I'd seen myself carrying in the security footage. Inside were things I recognized but didn't own yet. A watch I'd been planning to buy, a book I'd added to my wish list but never ordered, a coffee mug from a vacation I hadn't taken. At the bottom was a folder labeled Inventory Returns in my handwriting. The first page was a list, items for return, Unit 447B status, in progress jacket, returned. Notebook, returned. Keys, pending. Telephone, pending. Tenant, pending. The bathroom door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Through the door, I could hear movement. Footsteps that matched my gait, the specific way I cleared my throat in the morning. The doorknob began to turn from the inside. I grabbed the box and ran back to my car. There was only one place left to go. The storage facility was quiet in the morning light, the gate standing open as if expecting me. Unit 447B's padlock was already undone, hanging open on the latch. Inside, the space had changed. What had been a storage unit was now something else. Larger, impossibly deep, stretching back into darkness. The boxes were gone, replaced by doors. Dozens of them, lining walls that shouldn't exist, each one familiar. My childhood bedroom door, my first apartment, the office where I worked, the motel room from last night. All of them cracked open, showing slivers of my life from different angles, different times. At the center sat a desk I recognized from nowhere and everywhere at once. On it was a ledger, thick and ancient-looking, filled with entries in my handwriting, spanning dates that went back decades before my birth and forward into years I'd never see, or had already seen, or was seeing now. The final entry was still being written, the ink appearing letter by letter as I watched. The tenant understands. Everything borrowed must be returned. Every version, every iteration, every possibility. Unit 447B is not a storage space but a collection point. The tenant agrees to terms already accepted, will accept, has always accepted. The inventory is complete. The return begins. Now, I said aloud, though I hadn't meant to speak. Behind me, footsteps, multiple sets, all with my distinctive gait. I turned to see them filing in. All the versions of myself from every when and everywhere, each carrying their own box of returns. We moved without speaking, placing our boxes in rows with the mechanical precision of a process we'd done before, would do again, were doing now. The last one to enter was me from yesterday, still excited about the bargain he'd found at the storage auction. He looked at me, at all of us, with growing horror. "What is this?" he asked. "The return bin," we answered in unison. The lights went out. In the darkness, I could feel myself becoming less solid, less singular. The boundaries between the me who entered yesterday and the me who would enter tomorrow blurred and overlapped. We were all returning now, being sorted back into wherever things go when they're no longer needed in their current form. The last thing I remember clearly is the sound of the padlock clicking shut from the inside. I'm writing this from Unit 447B. Or maybe I'm reading it. Or maybe I left it here for myself to find. Time doesn't work the same way in the return bin. The notebook regenerates pages as fast as I can fill them, and the pen never runs out of ink. Sometimes someone new wins the auction. They always have the same look, excited about the bargain, confident they've outsmarted everyone else. They always find the jacket first, then the notebook, then the phone rings. I try to warn them, but my voice comes out as theirs. My words become their thoughts. My warnings become their discoveries. We're all just items in the inventory, waiting to be returned, being returned, already returned. The facility manager stopped by yesterday, or tomorrow, or never. "How's the unit working out?" he asked through the door. "Perfect," I replied with a voice that might have been mine. "Everything's exactly where it should be." He slid an envelope under the door. Inside was a new contract, dated for next week's auction. My signature was already on it, though I hadn't signed it yet. The terms were simple. The tenant agrees to store all versions of themselves in perpetuity. The unit will be available for viewing by appointment only. Returns guaranteed. I can hear the auctioneer starting his patter outside. Unit 447B is up for bid again. $23. Someone always bids $23. They think they're getting a deal. They're right, in a way. They're getting exactly what they paid for. A preview of their own return. The jacket will fit perfectly. The notebook will contain their handwriting. The phone will ring with their future calling their past. And somewhere, in a storage unit that exists in no time and all time simultaneously, another version of them is already writing this story, has always been writing this story, will write this story forever. The lights flicker, footsteps in the corridor, one by one. Click, pause, click, pause. Someone's about to win an auction. Someone's about to come home.